Hi everyone, welcome back. If you're seeking calm, deep rest, and peaceful sleep, you're in the right place. Let's begin.
Welcome, friend, to another journey together. Tonight, you're about to uncover ancient wisdom that has guided seekers toward inner peace for thousands of years. If you'd like, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. I'll be reading a selection of profound Zen stories, tales that reveal the timeless secrets of mental freedom and emotional release. These aren't ordinary bedtime stories. Each one carries a powerful teaching, carefully passed down by enlightened masters who understood something essential: that true peace doesn't come from changing our circumstances, but from changing how we relate to them. The Buddha once said, "The mind is everything. What you think, you become." As we move through these stories together, you'll begin to see how this simple truth can reshape your relationship with stress, anger, and the endless craving for more. As you listen, something subtle may begin to shift. The tightness of worry may start to soften. The restless chatter of thought may quiet. Slowly, you may feel yourself settling into a deeper sense of understanding and rest. These teachings have been whispered through temple halls, echoed in moments of silence, and carried gently across generations. Each story holds a key. Some open doors where anger loses its grip. Others lead to spaces where the craving to possess dissolves. And some unlock the deep stillness of presence itself. So now, settle in. Let your body sink into the support beneath you. Take one conscious breath, and as you exhale, know that these teachings have been waiting patiently for you. This is the story of the monk and the frozen waterfall. In the depths of winter, when snow blanketed the mountain peaks and the air cut sharp as crystal, Master Dogen found himself traveling through a remote mountain pass. The path wound through ancient pines heavy with snow, their branches creating a cathedral of white silence. As he rounded a bend in the trail, he came upon an extraordinary sight: a monk sitting in perfect stillness before a magnificent frozen waterfall. The waterfall, which in warmer months would have cascaded down the cliff face in thunderous sheets of silver, now hung suspended like a curtain of ice. Massive icicles formed frozen columns from the rocky ledges above, creating a crystalline sculpture that caught and reflected the pale winter light. Before this frozen monument sat the monk, his dark robes stiff with accumulated ice, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Master Dogen approached quietly, his footsteps muffled by the snow. The monk's posture was impeccable despite the cold, spine straight, hands folded in meditation position, eyes gazing steadily at the frozen cascade before him. Frost had formed on his eyebrows and beard, and his robes had grown white with ice crystals, yet he remained motionless as the waterfall itself. "What are you seeking here, brother?" Master Dogen asked gently, his voice carrying softly through the winter stillness. The monk's eyes remained fixed on the waterfall as he replied, "I wait for the waterfall to teach me about flow while being still. I have been here for days, studying this mystery. How can something maintain its essential nature even when all movement appears to have stopped?" Master Dogen nodded thoughtfully, understanding the profound question that had drawn this monk to sit in such harsh conditions. He looked at the frozen waterfall, then bent down and selected a smooth stone from beneath the snow. Without warning, he drew back his arm and hurled the stone directly at the wall of ice. The stone struck the frozen surface with a sharp crack that echoed through the canyon like a bell. The sound reverberated off the cliff walls, bouncing back and forth in a gradually fading symphony that seemed to awaken the entire mountain. Birds stirred in the trees above, and small chunks of ice tinkled down from the impact point. "Did you hear the waterfall's teaching?" Master Dogen asked, his eyes twinkling with quiet amusement. The monk tilted his head, listening as the echo continued to fade through the canyon. As the sound gradually diminished, something shifted in his awareness. His eyes widened, and suddenly he began to laugh, a deep, joyful sound that seemed to warm the frozen air around them. He stood up slowly, brushing ice crystals from his robes with stiff fingers. "It never stopped flowing," he said, with wonder in his voice. "Even in stillness, it was always moving towards spring. The water is there, beneath the ice, waiting. The flow continues, even when I cannot see it." Master Dogen smiled and bowed to the monk. "And what else did you hear in that echo?" The monk paused, still listening to the fading reverberations in his memory. I heard that I was the one who was truly frozen. The waterfall knew exactly what it was doing." Buddha's wisdom reminds us, nothing is permanent. Everything is subject to change. Being is always becoming. What emerges from this story is a profound teaching about the nature of patience and the hidden dynamism within apparent stillness. Why do we become impatient when life seems frozen, when progress appears halted, when our circumstances feel stuck? Zen Buddhism points to our fundamental misunderstanding of time and change. We perceive in linear fragments, this moment, then the next, missing the deeper currents that flow beneath surface appearances. The monk's vigil represents our common human experience of waiting. We sit before the frozen waterfalls in our lives, the career that isn't advancing, the relationship that feels stagnant, the spiritual practice that seems to yield no progress, the healing that takes longer than expected. We mistake temporary stillness for permanent stagnation, external pause for internal death. Consider how often throughout your day you encounter your own frozen waterfalls. The traffic jam that feels endless, the slow response to an important email, the gradual recovery from illness or disappointment. In these moments, do you recognize the flowing beneath the stillness, or do you become frozen yourself, rigid with impatience and frustration? Zen master Huangpo taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." The monk initially rejected what he saw, a frozen waterfall, in favor of what he thought it should be. Master Dogen's stone revealed that thinking itself was the obstacle to deeper seeing. The stone striking the ice serves as a metaphor for the sudden insights that can shatter our fixed perspectives. Sometimes wisdom comes not through gradual understanding, but through jarring moments that crack open our assumptions. The echo that followed represents how true insight reverberates through our entire being, changing not just our thoughts, but our fundamental way of perceiving. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called dynamic stillness, the recognition that even in the deepest meditation, when the body is motionless and the mind is quiet, tremendous activity is occurring. Cells are regenerating, the heart is beating, breath is flowing, consciousness is processing. The stillness is not empty, but full of potential, like the frozen waterfall carrying within it the promise of spring's return. The waterfall's teaching extends beyond patience to trust. Water naturally flows downward, seeking its level, finding its way around obstacles. When winter comes, water doesn't fight the cold, it adapts, taking the form that conditions require while maintaining its essential nature. When spring returns, it will resume its visible flow without having lost anything essential during the frozen months. Tonight, as you consider the frozen waterfalls in your own life, can you sense the flow that continues beneath apparent stillness? Can you trust that the essential movement toward growth, healing, and awakening continues even when you cannot see evidence of progress? As the Buddha taught, drop by drop is the water pot filled. Likewise, the wise one, gathering it little by little, fills oneself with good. The waterfall teaches us that transformation happens both suddenly and gradually. Suddenly when we see clearly, gradually as conditions ripen toward change. Our next story reveals the subtle difference between perfection and presence. This is the tale of the tea master's empty cup. In the ancient art of tea ceremony, every movement carries meaning. Every gesture holds centuries of tradition. Master Seno had devoted his entire life to this practice, studying under the greatest teachers, perfecting each element until his ceremonies were renowned throughout the region. His reputation drew students from distant provinces, all seeking to learn the secrets of his flawless technique. One autumn morning, as golden leaves drifted past the windows of his tea house, Master Seno received an unexpected visitor. A Zen monk, travel-worn and humble, appeared at his door requesting nothing more than a moment of rest. Master Seno, always gracious to guests, saw an opportunity to share his art with someone who might truly appreciate its spiritual dimensions. "Honored monk," he said with a deep bow, "please allow me to prepare tea for you. I would be grateful for your presence at a ceremony." The monk accepted gratefully, settling onto the tatami mat with the simple ease of one accustomed to finding contentment in any circumstance. Master Seno began his preparations with the precision of a ritual master, each movement flowing into the next with practiced elegance. He selected the finest tea leaves from his collection, examining them with the attention of a jeweler, appraising precious stones. The water was heated to exactly the right temperature, neither too hot to scorch the delicate leaves, nor too cool to release their essence. He measured each portion with mathematical precision, his hands moving with the confidence of decades of practice. As he whisked the tea, Master Seno's movements became a meditation in motion. The bamboo whisk cut through the green liquid in perfect arcs, creating foam of exactly the right consistency. His breathing synchronized with the rhythm of his hands, his entire being focused on creating the perfect cup of tea. The monk watched silently, his eyes following each gesture with quiet attention. Master Seno felt a deep satisfaction knowing that his movements were being witnessed by someone who could appreciate their precision. Every detail was perfect. The angle of the spoon, the timing of each pour, the graceful arc of his wrist as he positioned the cup. When the tea was ready, Master Seno presented it with ceremonial flourish. The cup itself was a masterpiece of pottery, its glaze catching the morning light in subtle patterns. Steam rose from the green liquid within, carrying the sweet, earthy fragrance that spoke of spring rains and mountain mists. The monk accepted the cup with both hands, following proper etiquette. He lifted it slowly, inhaling the delicate aroma with evident appreciation. Master Seno watched expectantly, anticipating the moment when his guest would taste the culmination of his artistry. But instead of drinking, The monk examined the beautiful ceramic vessel, turning it slowly to admire its craftsmanship. He brought the cup close to his face, breathing in the fragrant steam with closed eyes. Then, gently, he set the cup down on the mat between them, the tea untouched. Master Seno felt a flutter of confusion. "Is my tea not to your liking, Reverend Monk?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. "Have I failed in some aspect of the preparation?" The monk looked up with kindness in his eyes. "Your tea is perfect, Master Seno. The preparation was flawless, the movements beautiful, the attention to detail extraordinary." He paused, his gaze gentle but penetrating. "But I was watching you drink it the entire time. There was nothing left for me." Master Seno stared at the monk, then at the full cup sitting between them. Slowly, the meaning of the words settled into his awareness like sediment settling in still water. His perfect ceremony, his flawless technique, his complete absorption in the performance. He had indeed consumed the tea through his own enjoyment of the process, leaving only the physical liquid for his guest. Understanding dawned, and Master Seno began to laugh. It started as a small chuckle, then grew into deep, appreciative laughter that seemed to fill the tea house with warmth. He had spent years perfecting the art of tea ceremony, but in his attachment to perfection, he had forgotten the ceremony's true purpose, the offering of presence, the sharing of a moment, the gift of simple being together. As the Buddha observed, attachment is the root of suffering. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding how our pursuit of perfection can become its own form of spiritual materialism, creating separation rather than connection. Why do we so often consume our own offerings through the very act of giving them? Zen Buddhism points to what might be called ego infiltration, the way our sense of self can colonize even our most generous impulses. When we perform acts of service, create works of art, or offer gifts to others, the ego often claims these actions as opportunities for self-enhancement rather than genuine offerings. Master Seno's predicament mirrors our daily experience in countless ways. Consider the parent who becomes so focused on providing the perfect birthday party that they miss their child's actual joy. The friend who prepares an elaborate meal while remaining so anxious about the cooking that they cannot enjoy their guests' company. The spiritual practitioner who becomes so attached to proper technique that they lose touch with the practice's purpose. This is not to diminish the value of skill, preparation, or attention to detail. Master Seno's technical mastery was genuine and beautiful. The problem arose when his awareness became so absorbed in his own performance that he lost connection with the recipient of his gift. He was like an actor who becomes so entranced by his own performance that he forgets his audience exists. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." The expert's mind that Suzuki warns against is not technical competence, but the kind of self-conscious mastery that obscures simple presence. When we become overly identified with our roles, whether as tea master, parent, teacher, or friend, we risk losing touch with the fresh, spontaneous awareness that makes genuine connection possible. The empty cup represents the space that remains when we offer something without consuming it ourselves through self-congratulation, anxiety about reception, or attachment to outcome. True generosity leaves the gift completely available to its recipient, unclaimed by the giver's ego. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called transparent action, doing what needs to be done without the doer becoming thick or self-conscious. This requires a fundamental shift from performing for approval to acting from love, from demonstrating competence to sharing presence. The monk's response demonstrates profound compassion. Rather than simply accepting the tea and drinking it politely, he offered Master Seno a gift more valuable than any tea, the mirror of awareness that revealed where attachment had crept into practice. This is the nature of true friendship, seeing clearly enough to reflect our blind spots with kindness. Tonight, as you consider the gifts you offer, your attention, your care, your skills, your presence, can you sense whether you're consuming them in the very act of giving? Can you offer something so completely that it becomes entirely available to its recipient, unclaimed by your own need for appreciation or recognition? As the Buddha taught, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. When we learn to give without consuming our own gifts, we discover that generosity multiplies rather than depletes us, leaving both giver and receiver nourished by the same offering. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, we encounter a story about the courage to question convention. This is the tale of the student who swept backwards. In the mountain monastery of Engakuji, young Myoan had recently arrived to begin his training in the way of Zen. Like all new students, he was assigned simple tasks designed to cultivate mindfulness and humility. The monastery followed ancient routines, each activity performed with precision and attention, each tradition passed down through generations of practitioners. Every morning before dawn, while the mountain mist still clung to the pine trees, and the first birds had not yet begun their songs, Myoan would rise with the other students to begin the daily cleaning of the monastery grounds. The courtyard was his responsibility, a large open space paved with smooth stones that led from the main gates to the Buddha hall at the center of the complex. The other students had taught him the proper way to sweep. Begin at the Buddha hall and work outward toward the gates, pushing leaves, dust, and debris away from the sacred spaces toward the periphery. This was the way it had always been done, they explained. The center must be kept pure, the sacred space protected from contamination. But Myoan, observing this practice each morning, felt something stir within him. Not rebellion, but genuine curiosity. As he swept, gathering autumn leaves and the dust of daily life, he began to wonder about the nature of this direction. Where exactly was he sweeping the dirt to? And what made one direction sacred and another profane? Day after day, he continued sweeping in the prescribed manner, but his questions grew stronger. If Buddha nature truly pervaded all things, as the teachings proclaimed, how could there be any direction that was away from the sacred? Was not the gate as holy as the altar? Were not the leaves as perfect as the polished floors? One morning, as the sun painted the mountain peaks with rose-colored light, Myoan made a decision that would change everything. Instead of beginning at the Buddha hall and sweeping outward, he started at the gates and swept inward, gathering leaves and dust toward the center of the monastery, toward the Buddha hall itself. The head monk, making his morning rounds to check on the students' work, stopped short when he saw what Myoan was doing. His face darkened with disapproval, and his voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "Student, what are you doing? You're bringing dirt toward the sacred space. The Buddha hall is where we keep our most precious statues, where we conduct our ceremonies. Sweep the debris away from the temple, not toward it." Myoan paused in his sweeping, leaning on the broom handle. He looked at the head monk with clear, untroubled eyes. "But Master," he replied quietly, "if Buddha nature is everywhere, as the teachings tell us, how can there be a direction that is away from the sacred? Is not the dust as much a manifestation of Buddha nature as the golden statue? Are not the fallen leaves as perfect as the polished altar?" The head monk's face flushed with anger. This was clearly insubordination, a dangerous questioning of established order. He raised his staff, the symbol of his authority, preparing to strike this impudent student who dared to challenge centuries of tradition. But as his arm reached the height of its swing, something extraordinary happened. The staff hung suspended in the air as the head monk's gaze fell upon the courtyard. Half of it had been swept in the conventional way by the other students, clean, proper, following tradition. The other half had been swept by Myoan toward the center, equally clean, equally orderly, but gathered in the opposite direction. Both halves were perfectly clean. Both reflected the same careful attention, the same devotion to the task. The only difference was the direction of the sweeping, and yet the result was identical. A courtyard free of debris, beautiful in its simplicity. The head monk's arm slowly lowered. He stood in silence, staring at the two halves of the courtyard, seeing in that moment the arbitrary nature of his own assumptions. The cleanliness was not in the direction of the sweeping, but in the quality of attention brought to the task. The sacredness was not in maintaining boundaries, but in recognizing the inherent perfection that exists everywhere. Without a word, he handed his staff to Myoan and asked to borrow the broom. The student and the teacher worked together in silence, completing the courtyard's cleaning, each following their own understanding of where the sacred resided. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us the Dharma is like the ocean. It has room for all rivers. This tale unveils the profound difference between blind conformity and conscious practice, between following rules and understanding principles. Why do we so readily accept conventional directions without examining their deeper meaning? Zen Buddhism points to what might be called institutionalized unconsciousness, the way established practices can become rigid forms that obscure rather than reveal the very truths they were designed to express. Religious and spiritual traditions inevitably develop conventional forms, and these forms serve important purposes. They provide structure, preserve wisdom, and create containers for sacred experience. But when we mistake the form for the essence, the method for the goal, we risk losing touch with the living truth that the forms were meant to convey. Myoan's questioning represents the healthy skepticism that prevents spiritual practice from becoming mere habit. His question, how can there be a direction that is away from the sacred, cuts to the heart of non-dual awareness, the recognition that reality is not divided into sacred and profane realms, but is whole, seamless, and inherently perfect. Consider how often in your own life you follow directions without questioning their underlying assumptions. Perhaps you've been taught that certain emotions are negative and should be swept away, while others are positive and should be cultivated. But what if all emotions are equally sacred expressions of your humanity? What if the attempt to sweep away difficult feelings is itself a form of spiritual materialism? Or perhaps you've learned that certain thoughts are spiritual while others are mundane, that meditation cushions are more sacred than office chairs, that silence is holier than conversation. Myoan's insight suggests that this kind of categorical thinking creates artificial divisions in what is actually a seamless whole. Zen Master Linji taught, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him." This shocking statement points to the same truth Myoan discovered. The moment we create fixed ideas about what is sacred and what is not, we limit our capacity to see the sacred everywhere. The real Buddha is not the statue in the hall, but the awakened awareness that recognizes its own nature in all things. The head monk's transformation in the story demonstrates the mark of a true teacher, the willingness to learn from students, to have assumptions challenged, and to recognize wisdom wherever it appears. His decision to hand over his staff and ask for the broom shows the kind of humility that keeps spiritual authority from becoming rigid dogma. This doesn't mean that all conventions are meaningless or that tradition has no value. Rather, it suggests that the highest respect for tradition comes from understanding its purpose deeply enough to know when its forms serve awakening and when they might obstruct it. The image of the two halves of the courtyard, one swept conventionally, one swept toward the center, both equally clean, offers a powerful metaphor for the many valid paths to the same truth. The goal is not uniformity of method, but clarity of seeing, not conformity of practice, but authenticity of realization. Tonight, as you consider your own spiritual practices and life routines, can you sense the difference between following forms consciously and following them blindly? Are there conventions in your life that you've never questioned, directions you've never examined? What would it mean to sweep toward the center of your own sacred space? The Buddha taught, "Do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it. Do not believe in traditions because they have been handed down for many generations. But after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it." In questioning the direction of his sweeping, Myoan embodied this teaching, discovering that the sacred is not diminished by honest inquiry, but revealed by it. Let us now explore a story about the weight of our attachments. This is the teaching of the merchant's heavy coin. In the bustling merchant quarter of old Edo, where the streets hummed with commerce and the air carried the scent of spices from distant lands, lived a successful trader named Tanaka. His warehouses overflowed with silk, tea, and precious metals. His ships sailed to ports across the known world, bringing back treasures that filled his coffers with gold. By all external measures, he had achieved the prosperity that so many dreamed of. Yet prosperity had brought an unexpected burden. Tanaka's mind had become like a marketplace that never closed, filled with the constant chatter of buying and selling, profit and loss, opportunity and risk. Even in the quiet hours before dawn, his thoughts raced through inventories and calculations, sailing schedules and market fluctuations. He had heard of Master Bankei, whose teachings drew people from all walks of life, farmers and nobles, artisans and scholars. Some said the master could bring peace to even the most troubled mind. Desperate for relief from his mental torment, Tanaka closed his shop early one afternoon and made his way to the humble temple where Bankei taught. The temple was a study in simplicity compared to the ornate merchant quarters. Bare wooden floors, paper screens that filtered golden afternoon light, and the subtle fragrance of incense created an atmosphere that felt like stepping into a different world. Tanaka found Master Bankei sitting quietly in the main hall, his presence radiating the kind of calm that the merchant had forgotten existed. "Master," Tanaka said, bowing deeply, "I have come seeking your guidance. I am a successful merchant, blessed with prosperity, but I find that meditation is impossible for me. My mind is always occupied with business concerns. No matter how I try to quiet my thoughts, they return immediately to matters of trade and profit. How can someone like me ever find peace?" Master Bankei regarded the troubled merchant with compassionate eyes. "Show me this busy mind," he said simply. Tanaka looked confused. "Well, right now, I'm thinking about a shipment of silk that should arrive tomorrow from the southern provinces. The weather might delay it, which would affect the price. And I'm concerned about the cost of rice this season. It's affecting my workers' wages. Then there's the question of whether my assistant in the warehouse can be trusted with the accounting. Just yesterday, I noticed discrepancies in the inventory that—" "Stop," Master Bankei said gently, raising his hand. The merchant's stream of words ceased abruptly. Master Bankei reached into his simple robe and withdrew a small gold coin, placing it on the low wooden table between them. The coin caught the afternoon light, gleaming against the dark wood. "Is this coin heavy?" the master asked. Tanaka reached out and picked up the coin, weighing it in his palm. It was well made, with crisp edges and the feel of pure gold, but physically it was quite small. "No, master, it's quite light, perhaps the weight of a few flower petals." Master Bankei nodded slowly. "Then why does it weigh so much in your mind?" The question hung in the air like incense smoke. Tanaka stared at the small coin resting in his palm, feeling its modest physical weight. But even as he held it, his mind began its familiar dance. This coin could buy a bolt of silk, or feed a family for a week, or be invested in a trading venture that might double its value. The physical coin was light, but the web of associations, possibilities, and concerns that surrounded it in his mind was enormously heavy. Gradually, Tanaka felt his shoulders relax as understanding dawned. The weight was not in the gold, but in his grasping. The coin itself was innocent, just metal shaped by human hands. The burden came from all the stories he told himself about what it meant, what it could become, what he might lose if he didn't handle it properly. He sat in silence, the light coin resting in his palm, feeling for the first time in years the difference between the thing itself and his mental elaborations about it. The revelation was so simple and so profound that he began to laugh softly, not at the absurdity of his situation, but at the elegance of the teaching. The Buddha taught, "You are what you think. All that you are arises with your thoughts. With your thoughts, you make your world." The deeper teaching here shows us how our relationship to objects and circumstances creates our experience of heaviness or lightness, burden or freedom. Why do we allow light things to become heavy in our minds? Zen Buddhism explains that the weight comes not from objects themselves, but from what we add to them through our mental processes. The merchant's gold coin demonstrates this perfectly. Physically insignificant, mentally enormous. Consider your own relationship to the coins in your life. Perhaps it's your bank account balance, which is just numbers on a screen, but carries the weight of security, status, and survival fears. Or your job title, which is just words on a business card, but bears the burden of identity, self-worth, and social acceptance. Or your physical appearance, which is just the arrangement of cells and chemistry, but carries the weight of approval, attraction, and belonging needs. Each of these things has a simple direct reality: numbers, words, biological processes. The heaviness comes from the elaborate mental structures we build around them, the stories of what they mean, the fears of what might happen if we lose them, the endless comparisons with others, the fantasies of what having more might bring. Zen master Yunmen said, "Medicine and sickness heal each other. The whole earth is medicine." The medicine for the merchant's heavy mind was not to get rid of his gold coins, but to see them clearly without the added weight of mental fabrication. This teaching points to a fundamental principle in Zen practice. The problem is not in our circumstances, but in our relationship to our circumstances. The merchant didn't need to renounce his wealth or abandon his business. He needed to discover the difference between necessary practical thinking and compulsive mental elaboration. Look deeply at your own experience. How much of your mental suffering comes from the actual weight of your responsibilities, and how much comes from the stories you tell yourself about those responsibilities? When you worry about tomorrow's meeting, is the weight in the meeting itself or in your projections about what might go wrong? When you feel burdened by your relationships, is the weight in the people themselves or in your expectations and interpretations? The Buddha said, "Pain is inevitable, suffering is optional." The merchant's situation illustrates this perfectly. Running a business involves genuine challenges and requires real attention. This is the inevitable pain of engagement with the world. But the constant mental churning, the endless worry loops, the weight of compulsive thinking, this is the optional suffering that comes from not seeing clearly. In Zen practice, we learn to work with what might be called functional thinking versus proliferating thinking. Functional thinking is direct, purposeful, and practical. The shipment arrives tomorrow. I need to prepare the warehouse. Proliferating thinking is elaborate, repetitive, and often anxious. What if the shipment is delayed? What if the quality is poor? What if this affects my reputation? What if... The gold coin teaching offers a practical method for recognizing when thinking has become proliferative. When you notice mental heaviness, you can ask, what is the actual weight of the situation? Often you'll discover that the real circumstances are quite manageable, but your relationship to them has become complex and burdensome. Tonight, as you notice your mind gravitating toward the heavy coins in your life, the concerns, responsibilities, and challenges that seem to weigh so much, can you distinguish between their actual weight and the weight you add through mental elaboration? Can you hold them lightly, like the merchant learning to feel the true weight of gold? As the Buddha taught, holding on to anger is like picking up a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. The same principle applies to all our mental coins. The weight is not in the gold, but in the grasping. When we learn to hold our circumstances lightly, we discover that even the heaviest responsibilities can be carried with grace. Now, let us turn to a story about the essence beyond form. This is the tale of the master who forgot how to bow. Master Sengai had devoted 70 years of his life to the practice of Zen. He had trained under illustrious teachers, mastered the ancient texts, and guided countless students toward awakening. His reputation for wisdom and compassion had spread throughout the land, drawing visitors from distant provinces who sought his guidance. But as often happens with great age, his memory had begun to fade in small ways, creating moments of confusion that would have embarrassed a younger man. On this particular morning, the meditation hall was filled with an unusual gathering. Along with the regular community of monks and lay practitioners, a delegation of government officials had arrived to pay their respects to the venerable master. These were men of importance, accustomed to ceremony and proper protocol, who had come to honor the monastery with their presence and, not incidentally, to be seen honoring it. The morning ritual began as it had for centuries. Students and visitors filed into the meditation hall, taking their places on cushions arranged in precise rows. The ancient wooden floors creaked softly under the weight of so many bodies, and the air carried the familiar scent of incense mixed with the morning mist that drifted through the paper screens. As the senior teacher, Master Sengai was expected to lead the assembly in the traditional bows before the Buddha statue. These prostrations were performed with elaborate precision. a full prostration to the floor, hands placed just so, the timing synchronized with the rhythm of wooden blocks struck by the temple attendants. It was a ritual he had performed thousands of times, a dance of reverence so deeply embedded in muscle memory that it should have been automatic. But as Master Sengai approached the front of the hall, something strange happened. He paused before the golden Buddha statue, his hands beginning to move into the familiar position, then stopping uncertainly. He looked at his hands as if they belonged to someone else, then glanced around at the assembled practitioners who were waiting for his lead. The younger monks watched with growing concern as their revered teacher stood motionless, clearly struggling to remember the proper form. Some of the visiting officials shifted uncomfortably on their cushions, whispering among themselves. The moment stretched on, becoming increasingly awkward as the entire assembly waited for Master Sengai to begin the ceremony. One of the visiting dignitaries, a man accustomed to having his own importance acknowledged, could not contain himself. In a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, he whispered to his companion, "How shameful. The master has forgotten the Dharma. How can someone who claims to be enlightened forget such basic practices?" Master Sengai's hearing, though aged, was still sharp enough to catch these words. He turned toward the voice with a gentle smile, showing no trace of embarrassment or offense. Instead of attempting to fumble through the traditional bows or asking for assistance, he did something completely unexpected. He walked slowly to the center of the meditation hall, where everyone could see him clearly. There, he simply stood quietly with his hands resting naturally at his sides, his posture upright but relaxed, his breathing calm and steady. The morning light filtering through the paper screens seemed to illuminate his weathered face. And in that moment, his very presence filled the hall with a quality of peace that was more profound than any formal ceremony. "I have forgotten how to bow," he announced to the entire assembly, his voice carrying easily through the sudden silence. "But I have not forgotten how to be grateful." The effect of these words was immediate and transformative. The hall fell into a silence so complete that even the birds outside seemed to pause in their singing. In that moment of perfect stillness, Master Sengai's simple standing became more eloquent than 1,000 perfect prostrations. His presence itself was a teaching more profound than any formal demonstration of religious protocol. The visiting officials, who moments before had been whispering their criticism, found themselves profoundly moved. The younger monks, who had been worried about their teacher's lapse in memory, suddenly understood that they were witnessing something far more valuable than correct technique. In forgetting the form, Master Sengai had revealed the essence that the form was meant to express. He stood there for several more moments, his very being radiating the gratitude he had spoken of. Gratitude for the morning light, for the assembly gathered in practice, for the breath moving through his aged body, for the simple miracle of being present in this moment. His stillness was not empty, but full, not a failure to act, but a perfect expression of what lies beyond all actions. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." This story points us toward understanding the relationship between spiritual form and spiritual essence, between religious protocol and authentic realization. Why do we sometimes become so attached to spiritual forms that we lose touch with their purpose? Zen Buddhism explains that practices and rituals serve as fingers pointing at the moon, valuable as long as we remember they're meant to direct our attention towards something beyond themselves. The danger comes when we mistake the finger for the moon, the method for the goal. Master Sengai's failure to bow correctly became a teaching about the difference between performing gratitude and being grateful. Consider how often in your own life you might go through the motions of spiritual practice, meditation, prayer, study, while losing touch with the spirit that gives these practices meaning. Have you ever found yourself more concerned with doing meditation correctly than with the awareness that meditation is meant to cultivate? The criticism from the visiting official represents the voice of spiritual materialism, the tendency to judge spiritual worth by external markers rather than internal realization. This voice exists not just in others, but within ourselves, constantly measuring our practice against idealized standards, worried more about appearing spiritual than being authentic. Look deeply at your own experience. How often do you find yourself performing spirituality rather than embodying it? Perhaps you've sat in meditation worried more about maintaining perfect posture than cultivating present moment awareness, or attended religious services more concerned with being seen as devout than with opening your heart, or engaged in acts of service while secretly hoping for recognition rather than simply responding to what's needed. Master Sengai's response demonstrates what Zen calls great faith, not belief in doctrines, but trust in the essential nature that exists prior to all forms. When he forgot how to bow, he didn't panic or try to fake his way through the motions. Instead, he trusted that his authentic presence was itself a complete expression of reverence. Zen teacher Bankei Yotaku said, "The unborn Buddha mind is marvelously illuminating." What Master Sengai revealed in his simple standing was this unborn mind, the awareness that doesn't depend on memory, technique, or performance, but shines through authentic presence. This teaching extends far beyond formal spiritual practice to every aspect of daily life. How often do we get caught in the protocols of social interaction while losing touch with genuine connection? We remember the right words to say in professional meetings, but forget how to truly listen. We follow the expected behaviors in relationships, but lose touch with authentic care. We perform the roles that society expects while becoming strangers to ourselves. The transformation that occurred in the meditation hall demonstrates the power of what might be called transparent authenticity. When someone drops all pretense and simply shows up as they are, it creates space for others to do the same. Master Sengai's admission that he had forgotten how to bow gave everyone permission to acknowledge their own moments of confusion, their own struggles with spiritual perfectionism. His declaration that he had not forgotten how to be grateful points to the essence that underlies all spiritual practice. Gratitude is not a technique to be learned, but a recognition of what's already present. It doesn't require memory, because it arises spontaneously when we truly see our circumstances. It doesn't need perfect expression, because it is itself the perfection we seek. The image of Master Sengai standing simply in the morning light, his presence filling the hall with peace, offers a powerful teaching about what Zen calls just sitting. In Shikantaza, the practice of just sitting, we discover that meditation is not something we do, but something we are. Enlightenment is not a state we achieve, but our natural condition when we stop trying to be something other than what we are. This doesn't mean that forms and practices are meaningless. The traditional bows, the meditation postures, the chanted prayers, All of these can be valuable supports for spiritual development, but they serve their highest purpose when they help us discover the essence that doesn't depend on form, the gratitude that doesn't require technique, the peace that exists prior to all practices. Tonight, as you consider your own spiritual journey, can you sense the difference between performing practice and being present? Are there forms in your life that have become rigid, techniques that have become obstacles to the very awareness they were meant to cultivate? What would it mean to forget how to bow, but remember how to be grateful? As the Buddha taught, believe nothing, no matter where you read it or who said it, no matter if I have said it, unless it agrees with your own reason and your own common sense. Master Sengai's teaching emerges not from perfect memory or flawless technique, but from the common sense of an awakened heart that recognizes gratitude as the most natural response to existence itself. In forgetting the form, he remembered the essence. In releasing the protocol, he revealed the presence that all protocols are meant to serve. His simple standing became a gesture more profound than any prostration, because it arose not from habit or expectation, but from the spontaneous expression of what he truly was, a human being awake to the miracle of being alive. Let us now explore a story about the invisible burdens we carry through life. This is the tale of the empty backpack. In a serene monastery garden, where morning dew glistened on carefully tended paths, a young seeker approached his teacher with a question weighing heavily on his heart. His eyes reflected both determination and confusion as he bowed respectfully. "Master," he said, "I wish to understand my path on earth better. Why do I seem to carry my past and relive it again and again? Why can't I get past my past?" The master studied the young man with compassionate eyes, then gestured toward an intricate maze of translucent silk panels, shimmering in the garden's filtered sunlight. "Go forward into the maze," he said, reaching for a leather backpack. "But carry this as you walk. It will help you stay focused. Be careful though, as it is quite heavy." The young man accepted the backpack, initially surprised by how easily the master handed it over. But the moment it settled into his grasp, he gasped. The weight was extraordinary, forcing him to bend forward as he struggled toward the maze. Inside the silken labyrinth, he immediately encountered solid walls. Through the translucent material, he could see other seekers navigating their paths like distant ghosts. No matter which direction he turned, every path seemed blocked. Exhausted, he sat down to think. "Others are clearly ahead of me," he thought. "Should I cheat and crawl under the silk?" After wrestling with these thoughts, he chose integrity. As he stood with renewed resolve, an opening magically appeared. Progress felt rewarding until he faced another wall. This time, good intentions yielded no results. The backpack's weight became unbearable, cutting into his shoulders. What could be so heavy yet feel so soft? Overcome with curiosity, he removed the pack and peered inside. It was completely empty. Yet when he lifted it again, the weight remained undeniable. As he placed it back on his shoulders, a voice whispered clearly, "Look inside of you, young man, for the weight lies there." Suddenly, memories flooded his consciousness. His childhood tormentors, accumulated hurts, and resentments carried for years. As he relived each painful experience, the backpack grew heavier. Then understanding dawned. "I am the weight. I carry the burden of that which troubles me. With this insight, he began the work of forgiveness. I forgive you, wherever you are, he found himself saying. Immediately, the pack lightened and new pathways opened. As sunlight warmed his face, and he remembered moments of love. The weight continued diminishing until the backpack felt weightless. Finally, surrounded by solid silk walls, he sat in meditation. I am the light and the way. I recognize that I was the impediment, not anyone else. At these words, his feet began rising from the earth. He floated above the maze, seeing how others remained trapped by darkness in their own packs. With a thought, he found himself beside his teacher outside the labyrinth. Master, he said, his face radiant, I discovered that my darkness caused my weight, and my lightness freed me to fly. The master smiled knowingly. What do you feel, young one? Do you feel freed? Without waiting for an answer, he walked away. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. This ancient teaching illuminates the profound truth revealed in the empty backpack story. We are the creators of our own burdens. What emerges from this tale is recognition that our past does not imprison us. Our relationship to our past does. The young seeker discovered that suffering came not from what others had done, but from his unwillingness to release those experiences. The empty backpack represents the invisible weight of unprocessed emotions and unhealed wounds we carry through life. Why do we cling so tenaciously to our pain? First is our identification with wounds. We derive identity from grievances, thinking, I am someone who was wronged, rather than, I experienced wronging, but I'm not defined by it. Second is our addiction to the familiar. Even painful emotions become comfortable because they're known. Third is our misunderstanding of forgiveness, believing it means condoning harmful behavior rather than freeing ourselves from resentment's prison. Consider how this plays out daily. The colleague who received credit for your idea still triggers anger. The parent who criticized you decades ago still influences your self-talk. Each is an invisible item in your backpack, weighing you down. Zen teacher Jack Cornfield taught, forgiveness is giving up all hope of having had a different past. We cannot change what happened, but we can change our relationship to what happened. The energy spent maintaining grievances could be redirected toward creating the life we actually want. The floating represents lightness available when we release psychological burdens. This isn't about bypassing pain, but processing experiences fully and choosing freedom over familiarity, growth over grievance. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, what invisible weight might you be carrying? Perhaps it's time to examine what you've been holding on to and ask, does this serve my highest good, or is it time to set it down? As the Buddha taught, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. The path to freedom begins with radical self-forgiveness and willingness to travel light through life's inevitable challenges. Our next story reveals the difference between technical mastery and true mastery of oneself. This is the lesson of the archer and the bridge. A young man had devoted years to perfecting his skill with the bow and arrow. Day after day, he practiced in all weather conditions, his dedication absolute, his focus unwavering. His technique became flawless, his aim so precise that he rarely missed his target, even at great distances. Word of his remarkable ability spread throughout the region, and he began winning archery contests one after another, each victory feeding his growing pride and confidence. Flush with success, and perhaps a bit intoxicated by his own reputation, the young archer decided to seek out the ultimate challenge. He had heard whispered stories of an old Zen master who lived high in the mountains, a man renowned not only for his spiritual wisdom, but also for his legendary skill with the bow. I will challenge this old master, the young man thought, and when I defeat him, everyone will know that I am the greatest archer in all the land. He found the master's simple dwelling and issued his challenge with the confidence of youth. "Old man," he said, perhaps more boldly than was respectful, "I have heard of your reputation with the bow. I challenge you to demonstrate whether your skill can match mine." The master, ancient eyes twinkling with quiet amusement, simply nodded his acceptance. The young archer immediately set up his demonstration. He selected a target at a considerable distance, drew his bow with practiced precision, and let loose his arrow. It flew straight and true, striking the exact center of the bullseye with a satisfying thud. Without pausing, he notched a second arrow, drew, aimed, and fired again. This arrow split the first arrow down its center, a feat of such technical brilliance that few archers in the world could have accomplished it. The young man turned to the master with obvious satisfaction, his chest puffed with pride. "There," he said, gesturing toward his perfect demonstration. "Let's see if you can match that display of skill." The old master looked at the target, then at the young man, and smiled gently. But instead of drawing his own bow, he simply motioned for the archer to follow him. "Come," he said quietly, "let us find a more suitable place for this demonstration." Curious about what the old man had in mind, and confident that no location could diminish his superior abilities, the young archer followed the master up a winding mountain path. They climbed higher and higher, the air growing thinner, the path more treacherous, until finally they reached a place where the mountain was split by a deep chasm. Spanning this terrifying gap was a single fallen log, weathered and narrow, that served as a bridge between the two sides. Far below, so far that the bottom disappeared into shadow, the chasm yawned like a hungry mouth. The slightest misstep would mean certain death. Without a word, the old master calmly stepped out onto this precarious bridge. His movements were unhurried, graceful, completely at ease despite the mortal danger. When he reached the center of the log, where it sagged slightly and swayed with his weight, he paused and turned to face a distant tree on the far side of the chasm. Drawing his bow with the same casual precision he might use in his own garden, the master took aim and released his arrow. It flew across the void and struck the distant tree with a clean, direct hit. Not necessarily more accurate than the young man's shots, but accomplished under conditions that would challenge even the most seasoned warrior. The master then gracefully stepped back onto solid ground and gestured toward the log bridge. "Now it is your turn," he said simply. The young archer approached the edge of the chasm and looked down into the seemingly bottomless abyss. His mouth went dry, his palms began to sweat, and his legs trembled beneath him. The very thought of stepping onto that narrow, unstable bridge filled him with paralyzing terror. The technical skill that had made him so confident suddenly seemed irrelevant in the face of this primal fear. He tried to force himself forward, but his body refused to obey. His hands shook so violently that he couldn't even grip his bow properly, much less aim with any precision. The steady breathing and focused concentration that had served him so well in controlled conditions completely abandoned him. The master watched this struggle with compassionate understanding. "You have developed great skill with your bow," he observed gently, "but you have little skill with the mind that lets loose the shot." As the Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between mastery of technique and mastery of the mind that employs the technique. Why do we so often mistake technical proficiency for true mastery? Zen Buddhism points to our tendency to focus on external accomplishments while neglecting the inner development that makes those accomplishments meaningful. We perfect our skills in controlled environments, but discover our limitations when facing uncertainty, danger, or genuine challenge. The young archer had indeed achieved remarkable technical skill, but only under ideal conditions. When his environment changed, when fear entered the equation, when the stakes became real, when his sense of safety was threatened, his carefully cultivated abilities disappeared entirely. His mastery was revealed to be shallow, dependent on external circumstances rather than inner stability. Consider your own areas of expertise. How does your competence hold up under pressure? When faced with genuine stakes, unfamiliar circumstances, or emotional challenges, do your skills remain intact, or do they crumble like the young archer's confidence on the bridge? In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called unshakable presence, the ability to remain centered and effective regardless of external conditions. This doesn't mean eliminating fear or challenge, but developing the inner stability that allows us to function skillfully even when afraid, uncertain, or under pressure. The master's demonstration wasn't about showing superior archery skills. It was about revealing the profound difference between skill that depends on perfect conditions and skill that emerges from inner mastery. His arrow didn't need to be more accurate than the young man's. It simply needed to be released from a place of genuine equanimity. Zen Master Bankei taught, "The unborn Buddha mind can handle any situation." This points to a quality of awareness that remains constant, whether we're shooting at safe targets or standing on precipices. It's the difference between confidence that comes from controlling our environment and confidence that comes from trusting our ability to respond wisely to whatever arises. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." One arrow shot from genuine presence and inner stability has more value than 1,000 arrows shot from ego and carefully controlled conditions. True mastery reveals itself not in perfect circumstances, but in our ability to maintain our center when everything around us is uncertain. Look deeply at your own relationship to challenge and fear. Where in your life do you perform well in safe, controlled environments but struggle when stakes are raised or conditions become unpredictable? This isn't a failure. It's simply information about where your practice needs to deepen. Tonight, as you consider the various skills and competencies you've developed, can you distinguish between those that depend on perfect conditions and those that remain stable under pressure? Can you sense the difference between the confidence that comes from avoiding challenge and the confidence that comes from meeting challenge with presence? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, chaos is inherent in all compounded things. Strive on with diligence. Life is the bridge over the chasm, uncertain, sometimes frightening, always requiring us to find our balance, not in the safety of solid ground, but in our ability to remain centered while walking through space. True mastery isn't about perfect aim. It's about maintaining our equilibrium, no matter where we find ourselves standing. Let us continue our journey with a story about the unexpected wisdom found in laughter and the suffering we create through taking ourselves too seriously. This is the tale of the monk who discovered his true teacher. In a remote mountain monastery in ancient China, there lived a young monk who approached his spiritual practice with tremendous intensity. Every morning before dawn, he would rise for meditation, sitting in perfect posture for hours without moving. He studied the Buddhist texts with scholarly precision, memorizing sutras and debating philosophical points with fierce concentration. His fellow monks often remarked on his seriousness and dedication to the Dharma. One crisp autumn morning, while studying a particularly complex passage about the nature of emptiness, the young monk encountered something that completely baffled him. The text seemed to contradict everything he thought he understood about Buddhist philosophy. The words appeared clear enough individually, but their meaning together seemed to dissolve into paradox the moment he thought he grasped it. Determined to understand, he carefully marked the passage and made his way to the master's quarters. The old teacher sat in his simple room, sunlight streaming through paper windows, creating patterns of light and shadow on the wooden floor. "Venerable master," the monk said, bowing deeply, "I have encountered a teaching that I cannot comprehend. Could you please illuminate its meaning for me?" He recited the passage with careful precision, explaining his confusion and the various interpretations he had considered. The master listened attentively, nodding occasionally, his expression thoughtful and engaged. When the young monk finished his earnest explanation, something unexpected happened. The master's face suddenly broke into a broad smile, then quiet chuckling, and finally erupted into hearty, uncontrollable laughter. His whole body shook with mirth, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. The monk stood frozen, completely bewildered. This was not the response he had anticipated. Where he expected profound wisdom and careful explanation, he found only laughter. The master's amusement seemed to fill the entire room, echoing off the walls and growing even more intense. Without offering any explanation, the master stood up, still laughing, and walked out of the room, leaving the young monk alone with his confusion and growing distress. For the next 3 days, the monk could think of nothing else. The master's inexplicable laughter haunted him constantly. He barely touched his meals, his meditation was scattered and unfocused, and sleep came only in brief, restless intervals. The question consumed him entirely. Why had his sincere spiritual inquiry been met with such puzzling amusement? Other monks noticed his distressed state, but his responses to their concerns were vague and troubled. He felt humiliated, confused, and increasingly agitated. Had the master been mocking his understanding? Was his question somehow foolish? Did his years of dedicated practice mean nothing? Finally, unable to bear the torment any longer, he returned to the master's room. This time, he didn't bow or recite passages. Instead, he spoke directly from his heart. "Master, for 3 days I have been deeply disturbed by your reaction to my question. I cannot eat, sleep, or meditate properly. Please tell me, why did you laugh at my sincere seeking? Have I done something wrong?" The master's expression became gentle and compassionate. He gestured for the young monk to sit beside him, then spoke with quiet clarity. "Monk, do you know what your problem is?" the master asked kindly. "Your problem is that you are worse than a clown." The words hit the young monk like a physical blow. His eyes widened in shock and dismay. "Venerable sir, how can you say such a thing? How can I be worse than a clown? I have dedicated my life to spiritual practice, to understanding the Buddha's teachings. I have sacrificed worldly pleasures and pursued wisdom with complete sincerity. How can you compare me to a mere entertainer?" The master smiled warmly and explained, "A clown's greatest joy comes from making people laugh. When others laugh, the clown feels fulfilled and happy. His entire purpose is to bring lightness and joy to the world. But you, when another person laughs, you feel disturbed, upset, and tormented. Tell me, are you not worse than a clown?" At these words, understanding dawned like sunrise breaking through clouds. The young monk saw immediately how his attachment to being taken seriously had created his suffering. He had been so invested in his image as a dedicated practitioner that he couldn't receive the master's joy. The laughter hadn't been mockery. It had been pure delight at the beauty of the Dharma expressing itself through paradox. In that moment of recognition, the monk began to laugh. First quietly, then with growing freedom and joy. He laughed at his own seriousness, at his attachment to understanding, at the beautiful absurdity of seeking enlightenment so grimly. His laughter joined with the master's from 3 days earlier, and in that shared joy, understanding flowered naturally. As the Buddha observed, if you light a lamp for somebody, it will also brighten your path. The heart of this lesson lies in recognizing how our reactions to others reveal the state of our own minds. Why do we become disturbed when others express joy in ways we don't understand? Zen Buddhism points to several patterns that create this type of suffering. First is our attachment to being understood and validated. The young monk's disturbance stemmed not from the master's laughter itself, but from his need for his question to be received with the seriousness he felt it deserved. Second is our identification with our spiritual image. When we become attached to being seen as sincere seekers, dedicated practitioners, or wise students, we lose the spontaneity and openness that allows genuine learning. The monk's investment in his identity as a serious practitioner made him unable to receive the teaching that was being offered through laughter. Third is our limited understanding of how wisdom can be transmitted. We expect spiritual teaching to arrive in familiar forms, solemn explanations, careful analysis, traditional formats. But enlightenment often comes through unexpected doorways. A master's laughter, a child's innocent question, the sound of a bell, or a moment of complete ordinariness. Consider how often we miss teachings because they don't match our expectations. Perhaps someone's casual comment contains exactly the insight we need, but we dismiss it because the person seems less knowledgeable than us. Maybe life presents us with lessons through situations we find annoying or people we consider frivolous. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." The young monk's expertise had become a barrier to learning. His certainty about how spiritual teaching should look prevented him from receiving the profound lesson being offered through unexpected laughter. The story points us toward a fundamental question. Are we seeking understanding, or are we seeking to be understood? Are we open to wisdom arriving in any form, or do we require it to validate our preconceptions? The master's laughter was a teaching about the joy inherent in the Dharma itself, the playful, spontaneous, beyond logic nature of awakened understanding. Tonight, as you encounter responses from others that don't match your expectations, can you remember the monk's revelation? Perhaps someone's laughter when you expected seriousness, their casualness when you hoped for depth, or their joy when you felt the situation called for gravity might contain teachings you haven't yet recognized. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." The master's laughter was not diminishing the Dharma, but celebrating its inexhaustible joy, a joy the monk discovered he could share rather than resist. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about transforming our relationship with suffering. This is the tale of the salt and the lake. In a quiet monastery nestled among rolling hills, there lived an aging master, renowned for his patience and wisdom. Among his students was a young apprentice whose heart had become heavy with complaints about life's difficulties. Each morning, the apprentice would arrive with fresh grievances. "Master, why is life so hard? Yesterday, my meditation was disturbed by noise. Today, my back aches from the hard floor. When will this suffering end?" His voice carried the weight of someone who had catalogued every small discomfort until they had grown into an overwhelming burden. The master listened with infinite patience, but as days turned to weeks, he recognized that words alone would not shift his student's perspective. One crisp morning, as golden sunlight streamed through their simple dwelling, the master made an unusual request. "My dear student," he said gently, "I need you to go to the kitchen and bring me some salt. Just a handful will suffice." The apprentice, puzzled by this simple task, nonetheless obeyed. He returned with cupped palms containing coarse white crystals. "Now," the master instructed, producing a small glass of water, "place all of that salt into this glass and drink it." The young man hesitated. "Master, that seems like far too much salt for such a small amount of water." "Trust the process," the master replied. "Drink." The apprentice poured the salt into the glass, watching the crystals dissolve into a cloudy, unappetizing mixture. He lifted it to his lips and took a large gulp, immediately grimacing as the intensely bitter taste filled his mouth. "How does it taste?" the master asked. "Bitter," the apprentice spat. "Terribly, overwhelmingly bitter. I can barely stand it." The master chuckled softly. "Excellent. Now bring that same amount of salt and come with me." Together, they walked in contemplative silence until they reached the shores of a pristine mountain lake. The water stretched before them like a mirror, reflecting the sky so perfectly that it was difficult to tell where earth ended and heaven began. "Now," the master said, "place this handful of salt into the lake." The apprentice waded into the shallow water and opened his hands, watching as the salt crystals scattered across the lake's surface, quickly dissolving without leaving any visible trace. "Drink from the lake," the master instructed. The young man cupped the lake water in his hands and brought it to his lips. The water was clean, refreshing, with the pure taste of mountain streams. "How does it taste?" the master asked. "Much fresher," the apprentice replied, genuinely surprised. "Clean and pure." "Do you taste the salt?" the master inquired gently. The student paused, paying careful attention. "No," he said slowly. "I don't taste any salt at all." The master sat beside his student on a smooth stone at the water's edge. His weathered hands reached out to clasp the young man's hands in profound tenderness. "My dear student," the master said, "the pain of life is pure salt, no more, no less. The amount of pain in existence remains constant, but the amount of bitterness we experience depends entirely on the container we put that pain into." The apprentice listened with new understanding. "When you are in pain," the master continued, "the only thing you can truly control is your response. You can choose to be a small glass where every grain of salt overwhelms your senses. Or you can choose to enlarge your sense of things, to become like this vast lake where the same salt dissolves harmlessly into something much greater. The master paused. Stop being a glass, my friend. Become a lake. The Buddha once said, pain is certain, suffering is optional. This fundamental teaching reveals the heart of our relationship with difficulty. We cannot eliminate the challenges woven into human existence, but we have tremendous power over how that pain affects us. What emerges from this story is understanding about consciousness itself. Our awareness is not fixed in size. It can contract into the narrow confines of a glass, where every difficulty looms enormous. Or it can expand into the spaciousness of a lake, where the same difficulties become manageable. Why do we often choose to be the glass rather than the lake? First is our tendency toward pain myopia, becoming so focused on discomfort that it fills our entire awareness. Second is our habit of story proliferation, taking a single, painful event and creating elaborate narratives about how unfair life is. Third is the comparing mind, measuring our pain against an imaginary standard of how life should be. The lake perspective doesn't minimize genuine pain or suggest passivity. Rather, it offers a skillful way of relating to inevitable challenges that doesn't compound them with unnecessary suffering. From lake consciousness, we can respond to problems more creatively because we're not overwhelmed. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible." From the lake perspective, we remember that everything arises and passes away within the vast space of awareness. Today's crisis becomes tomorrow's memory. We become a lake through practices that naturally expand awareness. Meditation teaches us to rest in spacious presence. Gratitude helps us notice experiences beyond immediate difficulties. Service reminds us that our pain is part of shared human experience. Tonight, as you reflect on current challenges, can you sense the difference between experiencing them from glass consciousness versus lake consciousness? What would it feel like to allow your awareness to expand beyond the immediate intensity of difficulties to include the vast context of this moment? As the Buddha taught, if you want to know your mind, sit down and observe it. If your mind is clear, happiness will come. The clarity he speaks of is not the absence of salt, but the spaciousness to hold it skillfully. In becoming lakes rather than glasses, we discover that pain can become a gateway to deeper compassion and freedom. Let us continue with a story about the limits of understanding and the honesty of not knowing. This is the teaching of the Emperor and Master Gudo. The Emperor of Japan, a man accustomed to receiving definitive answers from his advisors and scholars, had arranged a private audience with Master Gudo, one of the most respected Zen teachers in the realm. The Emperor came with genuine curiosity about spiritual matters, particularly questions about life, death, and what might lie beyond ordinary understanding. Seated in the formal chamber where matters of state were usually discussed, the Emperor felt comfortable posing even the most profound questions to this renowned master. After all, if anyone would possess answers to life's deepest mysteries, surely it would be an enlightened Zen teacher who had spent decades in contemplation and practice. Master Gudo, the Emperor began with the directness that comes from a lifetime of authority. I have a question that has troubled many great minds throughout history. What happens to a man of enlightenment after death? Surely someone of your spiritual attainment would understand such matters. The emperor expected a profound discourse on the nature of consciousness after physical death, perhaps insights into rebirth, karma, or the eternal nature of enlightened awareness. He was prepared to hear about subtle realms, the dissolution of individual consciousness into cosmic unity, or other elevated teachings that would satisfy his curiosity about this ultimate mystery. Instead, Master Gudo looked at the emperor with complete equanimity and gave the most honest answer possible. How should I know? The emperor was taken aback. Here was a master revered throughout the land for his wisdom, essentially admitting ignorance about what seemed like a fundamental spiritual question. But master, the emperor pressed, somewhat incredulous, you are an enlightened teacher. Surely you must have special knowledge about such things. Gudo's response was immediate and perfectly logical. Yes, sir, but not a dead one. The simplicity of this exchange contains a profound teaching about the nature of genuine wisdom and the difference between authentic understanding and pretended knowledge. As the Buddha taught, I know nothing except the fact of my ignorance. This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound honesty that characterizes true spiritual maturity, the willingness to admit the limits of one's knowledge, rather than pretending to understand what cannot be known from one's current position. Why do we expect spiritual teachers to have answers to questions that can only be resolved through direct experience? Zen Buddhism emphasizes the importance of distinguishing between conceptual knowledge and lived understanding, between what we can theorize about and what we can actually know. Master Gudo's response wasn't a failure of wisdom, but a demonstration of it. He refused to engage in speculation about experiences he hadn't had, even when pressed by someone in a position of great authority. His honesty revealed more wisdom than any elaborate theory about post-death consciousness could have provided. Consider how often in daily life we pretend to know things we don't actually know. Whether it's offering confident opinions about complex social issues, giving definitive advice about other people's relationships, or claiming certainty about uncertain outcomes, we often feel pressured to appear knowledgeable rather than admitting the limits of our understanding. The emperor's assumption that enlightenment should include knowledge about death reflects a common misconception about spiritual development. We imagine that awakening provides a comprehensive database of cosmic information rather than a fundamental shift in how we relate to not knowing. In Zen practice, we cultivate what Suzuki Roshi called "don't know mind," a state of open awareness that doesn't need to fill every gap in understanding with theories or beliefs. This isn't ignorance, but a wise recognition that direct experience is more valuable than second-hand information. Zen Master Linchi taught, there is nothing special to do, nothing special to learn. Enlightenment doesn't grant supernatural knowledge about matters beyond ordinary experience. A living master knows about living. What happens after death remains in the realm of speculation until one actually dies. The Buddha said, "Believe nothing merely because you have been told it. But whatsoever, after due examination and analysis, you find to be conducive to the good, the benefit, the welfare of all beings, that doctrine believe and cling to." Even the Buddha encouraged direct investigation over accepting claims based on authority. Gudo's teaching reveals the freedom that comes from releasing the need to have opinions about everything. How much mental energy do we waste constructing theories about things we cannot possibly know? How much suffering comes from worrying about scenarios we can only imagine? Look deeply at your own relationship with not knowing. Where do you pretend certainty to avoid the discomfort of uncertainty? What would change if you could say, "I don't know," with the same confidence that Master Gudo displayed. The emperor sought knowledge about death from someone who was vibrantly alive. But true wisdom might be found not in accumulating information about future experiences, but in fully engaging with present reality. The mystery of death is honored not by pretending to solve it, but by living authentically in the face of it. Tonight, as you encounter questions about the future, about others' motivations, or about cosmic mysteries, can you remember Master Gudo's honest simplicity? Can you find the courage to admit when you don't know, discovering that don't know mind might be wiser than all our clever theories? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. In a world full of false certainties and confident ignorance, the Master's honest, "How should I know?" points toward a more genuine relationship with mystery, one that honors what cannot be known, while fully embracing what can be directly experienced. Now, let us explore a story about the paradoxical nature of spiritual seeing and the limits of conceptual understanding. This is the teaching of 3 strikes and deeper vision. In the mountain monastery, where the 6th patriarch Hui Neng taught, students came from across China to study with the master, whose realization was said to surpass all others of his time. Among these seekers was a brilliant young monk named Shen Hui, known for his sharp intellect and probing questions. Unlike many students who approached the patriarch with humble requests for basic instruction, Shen Hui often challenged the master with sophisticated philosophical inquiries. One afternoon, as golden sunlight streamed through the monastery windows and the air carried the peaceful sounds of monks going about their daily practice, Shen Hui found the 6th patriarch sitting quietly in the main hall. The master's posture was perfectly still, his breathing soft and natural, his expression serene yet alert, the embodiment of meditation in action. Seeing an opportunity to test his understanding against the master's realization, Shen Hui approached with a question that had been forming in his mind during his own meditation practice. The nature of perception during spiritual practice had become a source of great curiosity and confusion for him. "Hi, Master," Shen Hui said, bowing respectfully but speaking with the confidence of someone who believed his question particularly insightful. "When you sit in meditation, do you see or not?" To Shen Hui, this seemed like a perfectly reasonable inquiry into the mechanics of enlightened awareness. Did awakened consciousness involve special kinds of seeing? Did meditation reveal mystical visions or higher perceptions unavailable to ordinary minds? Or did true realization transcend seeing altogether, existing in some pure state beyond sensory experience? What he received in response was completely unexpected. Without warning, the 6th patriarch picked up his wooden teaching stick and struck Shen Hui 3 times in rapid succession, not gently, but with enough force that the blows stung sharply and left the young monk both physically uncomfortable and mentally bewildered. "When I hit you," the patriarch asked with the same calm tone one might use to discuss the weather, "does it hurt or not?" Shen Hui rubbed his smarting shoulders, his mind racing to understand what had just occurred. The question seemed simple enough, yet something about the context made him suspect that a straightforward answer might be inadequate. The physical sensation was undeniable, yet the spiritual implications felt complex. "It both does and does not hurt," he replied carefully, intuiting that the master was pointing towards some paradox beyond ordinary logic. "I both see and do not see," the 6th patriarch responded, his words carrying the weight of direct experience rather than philosophical speculation. But Shen Hui's intellect wasn't satisfied with paradox. He needed to understand the mechanics, to categorize and explain this teaching in terms his conceptual mind could grasp. "How can you both see and not see?" he pressed, genuine confusion evident in his voice. "That seems contradictory. Either you see during meditation or you don't. How can both be true simultaneously?" The patriarch's response came with the patience of someone who had spent decades helping students move beyond the limitations of dualistic thinking. "What I see," he explained with gentle clarity, "are the waverings and wanderings of my own mind. What I do not see is the right and wrong and good and bad of other people. This is my seeing and not seeing." With these words, the entire teaching crystallized. The master wasn't speaking about mystical visions or transcendent states, but about the fundamental shift in perception that accompanies genuine spiritual maturity. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. This teaching relates profoundly to the patriarch's lesson about the nature of awakened seeing. Why do we become confused when spiritual teachings transcend ordinary logic? Zen Buddhism explains that our conceptual mind operates through dualistic categories: seeing or not seeing, pain or no pain, right or wrong. But enlightened awareness doesn't eliminate these experiences. It transforms our relationship to them. The deeper teaching here shows us what authentic spiritual perception actually involves. The patriarch sees his own mental processes clearly, the arising and passing of thoughts, emotions, and reactions. This isn't a mystical power, but the natural result of sustained mindfulness practice. He observes the waverings and wanderings of consciousness without being lost in them. Simultaneously, he doesn't see in the judgmental sense, imposing categories of right and wrong, good and bad onto others' behavior. This non-seeing isn't ignorance, but wisdom, recognizing that such judgments often say more about the observer than the observed. Look deeply at your own patterns of perception. How much of what you think you see in others actually reflects your own mental projections? When someone irritates you, are you seeing their actual behavior clearly? Or are you seeing your own triggers and reactions? When someone impresses you, are you recognizing their genuine qualities? Or are you seeing your own desires for approval or achievement? This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between reactive perception and clear seeing. Reactive perception involves our past conditioning, our emotional needs, our judgmental habits. Clear seeing involves awareness that recognizes its own processes while remaining open to what's actually present. Zen Master Dogen taught, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." This teaching points to the same insight the patriarch offered. True seeing involves turning attention toward our own mental processes rather than fixating on external judgments and evaluations. The 3 strikes Shen Hui received weren't punishment, but skillful teaching. Physical pain that both does and does not hurt points toward the mystery of conscious experience itself. Pain arises in awareness, is felt fully, yet doesn't define or limit the awareness that experiences it. Similarly, thoughts and emotions arise in consciousness without contaminating its essential clarity. Consider how this teaching might transform your daily experience. Instead of constantly evaluating others' behavior, finding fault, making comparisons, generating opinions, What if you turned that same attention toward observing your own mental reactions? What patterns would you discover in the wanderings and waverings of your own mind? This doesn't mean we become passive or lose our capacity for discernment. Rather, we develop the ability to respond from clarity rather than reactivity. When we see our own judgmental tendencies clearly, we naturally become less caught in them. When we observe our mental projections, we're less likely to mistake them for objective reality. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called mirror mind, awareness that reflects whatever arises without being stained or changed by it. This mirror sees everything clearly while maintaining its essential emptiness and openness. Tonight, as you notice your mind categorizing and judging the experiences of your day, can you remember the patriarch's teaching? Can you turn your attention toward the seer rather than constantly evaluating what is seen? Can you discover the freedom that comes from seeing your own mental processes without being enslaved by them? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." By learning to see our own mental patterns with compassion rather than judgment, we develop the clarity to see others with equal kindness and understanding. Now, let us turn to a tale about the difference between wisdom and words that attempt to contain it. This is the story of the pointing finger. In a peaceful valley monastery where evening mist gathered among ancient pines, a beloved Zen teacher enjoyed his daily ritual of walking with his faithful dog. The animal's joy was infectious, bounding ahead to retrieve sticks and returning with tail wagging, eyes bright with simple happiness. On this particular evening, the teacher invited one of his most promising students to join them. The young man was brilliant, his mind sharp as a blade, and equally capable of cutting through complex philosophical concepts. Yet this very intelligence had become a source of suffering. The more he studied Buddhist texts, the more contradictions he discovered. His bright mind seemed to be creating obstacles rather than clearing them. As they walked along the familiar trail, the student voiced his frustration. "Master, I struggle with contradictions in our teachings. Some texts speak of emptiness, others of Buddha nature. Some emphasize effort, others effortless being. How can these opposing instructions both be true?" The teacher listened with patient attention. He understood that intellectual brilliance could become a trap when the mind tried to grasp truth like solving a mathematical equation. Truth required a different kind of knowing altogether. "You must understand," the teacher said gently, "that words are only guideposts. Never let words or symbols get in the way of truth. Here, I'll show you." The teacher called his dog, who came running with eager enthusiasm. The full moon hung low in the darkening sky, its silver light beginning to emerge as daylight faded. The teacher pointed directly at the luminous orb and spoke to his pet with the same tone he used for their usual games. "Fetch me the moon," he commanded, his finger extended clearly toward the celestial body. The dog's response was immediate and predictable. His gaze fixed intently on the teacher's outstretched finger, following its movement with focused attention he typically reserved for thrown sticks. The animal's entire being concentrated on the pointing digit, completely oblivious to the moon hanging magnificently above. The teacher turned to his confused student with a knowing smile. "Where is my dog looking?" The student observed the scene with growing awareness. "He's looking at your finger," he replied, beginning to sense the deeper lesson. "Exactly," the teacher confirmed. "Don't be like my dog. Don't confuse the pointing finger with the thing being pointed at. All our Buddhist words are only guideposts. Every person must fight their way through other people's words to find their own truth. The young student stood in silence, feeling something shift in his understanding. The moon shone overhead, its light touching everything equally, regardless of whether anyone pointed at it. The truth was like that moon, present and luminous, independent of any description or analysis. As the Buddha observed, do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it, but after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good of one and all, then accept it and live up to it. This teaching addresses the exact confusion that plagued the bright student, mistaking concepts about truth for truth itself. Here we discover how intellectual understanding, while valuable, can become a barrier when we rely on it exclusively. The student's brilliant mind was capable of analyzing and comparing teachings, but analysis alone cannot deliver the direct experience that spiritual awakening requires. Like the dog fixated on the finger, he had become so focused on examining words and concepts that he missed the reality they attempted to indicate. Why do we become trapped in conceptual understanding? The thinking mind operates through division and comparison, understanding by breaking things into categories. But ultimate truth transcends these dualistic distinctions. It cannot be captured in concepts any more than the moon can be held in a photograph. This creates what Zen calls the great doubt, the frustrating recognition that our usual ways of knowing are inadequate for the most important questions. Different teachings use different words to point toward the same ineffable reality, like multiple fingers pointing at the same moon from various angles. Consider how this pattern manifests in spiritual seeking. We collect teachings like treasures, memorizing quotes from masters, analyzing meditation techniques, comparing different traditions. All of this can be valuable, but becomes problematic when we mistake accumulation of spiritual knowledge for spiritual development itself. Zen teacher D.T. Suzuki said, "The finger pointing at the moon is not the moon." This applies not only to spiritual teachings, but to all areas where we confuse the map for the territory. In relationships, we can become so focused on analyzing the relationship that we lose touch with the actual experience of loving. In nature, we can become so busy photographing that we miss the immediate wonder of simply being present. The moon represents what Zen calls our original nature, the awareness that exists prior to all concepts and categories. This awareness is always present, just as the moon exists whether or not anyone points at it. It doesn't need to be created or achieved, only recognized. This doesn't mean abandoning study or intellectual understanding. The teacher himself used words and concepts to convey his lesson. Rather, it means holding our conceptual knowledge lightly, using it as a tool rather than an end goal. Like a ladder that helps us reach a roof, spiritual teachings can be discarded once they've served their purpose. Tonight, as you encounter the inevitable complexity of modern life, can you distinguish between the pointing fingers and what they point toward? When you study spiritual teachings or seek guidance, can you remember that words are merely fingers pointing at the moon of your own innate wisdom? Buddha's wisdom teaches us, work out your salvation with diligence. The work involves not just understanding teachings intellectually, but moving through them to the reality they indicate. Let us continue our journey with a story about the transformative power of fearlessness and unconditional compassion. This is the tale of the thief and the Zen master. One quiet evening, As twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Zen master Shichiri Kojun sat in his simple home, reciting ancient sutras. His voice flowed rhythmically through the peaceful rooms, each word a meditation, each breath a prayer. The soft glow of candlelight danced across the walls as he immersed himself completely in the sacred texts, finding deep tranquility in the familiar verses. Suddenly, the serenity was shattered. The front door burst open with a violent crash, and a desperate man entered, brandishing a sharp sword that gleamed menacingly in the candlelight. His eyes were wild with desperation, his clothes dirty and torn, his breathing heavy from running. He had clearly chosen this isolated house because he believed it would be an easy target. A peaceful monk would offer no resistance. "Money or your life?" the thief demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and aggression. He expected the old man to cower, to plead, to scramble frantically for whatever valuables he might have hidden away. But Shichiri didn't even look up from his sutra book. His voice remained calm and steady as he continued reciting for a moment before pausing to address the intruder. "Please don't disturb my practice," he said, with the same gentle tone he might use to ask someone to close a door. "If you need money, help yourself. It's in that drawer over there." He gestured casually toward a simple wooden chest, then immediately returned to his recitation as if nothing unusual had occurred. The thief stood frozen, his sword still raised, completely bewildered. In all his years of stealing, he had never encountered such a reaction. No fear, no pleading, no anger, just matter-of-fact helpfulness, as if he were a neighbor who had stopped by to borrow something. Shaking his head in confusion, but proceeding with his business, the thief moved to the indicated drawer and began gathering the coins and small valuables he found there. The soft sound of the master's voice continued behind him, reciting sacred words as peacefully as if he were alone. Just as the thief was preparing to leave with his stolen goods, the master's voice called out again. "Wait," Shichiri said, finally looking up from his book. "Please don't take everything. I need some of that money to pay my taxes tomorrow. Leave a little for me, won't you?" The thief stared at him in amazement. Here was a man who was being robbed, calmly negotiating the terms of his own robbery, as if they were conducting normal business. Almost without thinking, the thief returned some of the money to the drawer. As he turned to leave, certain that this strange encounter was finally over, the master's voice stopped him once more. "You took my money," Shichiri called out, his tone carrying a note of reproach. "And you didn't even thank me. That's quite rude, don't you think?" This final comment left the thief completely speechless. His sword hand began to shake. Never in his most violent encounters had he been so thoroughly unnerved. Here was a man who treated robbery as if it were a favor, who was more concerned about politeness than personal safety. Thank you," the thief stammered, and then fled into the night as quickly as his legs would carry him. Later, when the thief was caught and confessed to numerous crimes, including the incident at Shichiri's house, the master was called as a witness. The court officials expected him to demand justice, to describe the terror and violation he had experienced. Instead, Shichiri spoke with the same calm clarity he had shown that evening. "This man did not steal anything from me," he testified. "I gave him the money freely. He even thanked me for it, though it took a little reminding." The thief, sitting in chains, felt something break open in his chest as he heard these words. This man had not only shown him extraordinary kindness in the moment of the crime, but was now protecting him from the consequences. For the first time in years, tears came to his eyes. Not tears of self-pity or anger, but tears of recognition. He had encountered something he had never experienced before: love without conditions. Upon his release from prison, the former thief sought out the master and begged to become his student. Under Shichiri's patient guidance, he learned to cultivate the same fearless compassion he had witnessed that night. Years later, through dedicated practice and the master's unwavering belief in his potential for transformation, he attained the deep peace and wisdom of enlightenment. As the Buddha observed, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What emerges from this story is the revolutionary power of meeting violence with absolute peace, responding to taking with giving, and answering fear with love. Why do we instinctively believe that force must be met with force, that aggression requires defensive reaction? Zen Buddhism reveals that this pattern, while natural, often perpetuates the very conflicts it seeks to resolve. When we respond to hostility with hostility, we simply escalate the cycle of suffering. But when we respond with genuine compassion, not passive submission, but active love, we create space for transformation that wouldn't otherwise exist. Look deeply at your own experience. When someone approaches you with anger, criticism, or demand, what is your automatic response? Most of us immediately mobilize our defenses, preparing to protect ourselves through counterattack or withdrawal. But notice what happens in your body and mind during these defensive reactions. Does the tension decrease or increase? Does the conflict resolve or intensify? Shichiri's response demonstrates what Zen calls skillful means, acting from wisdom rather than reflex. His fearlessness didn't come from being unaware of danger, but from understanding something profound about the nature of reality. He recognized that the thief's aggression arose from desperation and suffering, not from inherent evil. By refusing to see him as an enemy, Shichiri created the possibility for the thief to see himself differently. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called the courage of defenselessness. This doesn't mean being naive about genuine danger or allowing ourselves to be harmed unnecessarily. Rather, it means developing the confidence to respond to difficult situations from our highest wisdom, rather than our most primitive instincts. The Buddha taught, in the end, just 3 things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Shichiri embodied all 3 in his encounter with the thief. He lived from complete presence, loved without conditions, and let go of any attachment to his possessions or even his personal safety. Consider the people in your life who challenge you: the difficult colleague, the critical family member, the aggressive driver in traffic. What would it mean to meet their energy with the same kind of fearless compassion Shichiri showed? Not by agreeing with them or submitting to their demands, but by refusing to match their level of reactivity, by staying connected to your own center of peace, regardless of their behavior. Tonight, as you encounter your own moments of tension or conflict, can you remember the master who treated a robber as an honored guest? Can you find the space between stimulus and response where choice lives, where you can decide to meet aggression with peace, taking with giving, fear with love. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Sometimes the most powerful response to violence is simply to remain unshakable in our commitment to compassion, knowing that love has a transformative power that force can never match. Our next story reveals how liberation comes not from achieving something new, but from recognizing what was never born and can never die. This is the teaching of freedom from birth and death. In a quiet monastery garden where cherry blossoms drifted on the spring breeze, a dedicated student named Goshu approached the wise Zen master Yue. For years, Goshu had been practicing meditation, studying texts, and following all the prescribed methods of spiritual development. Yet despite his sincere efforts, he felt no closer to the enlightenment he desperately sought. Goshu bowed respectfully before his teacher, his face showing the strain of prolonged spiritual seeking. "Master, I have been studying Zen for many years, following every instruction, sitting in meditation daily, reading the ancient texts. But I have not yet succeeded. I feel as lost as when I began. Please give me some guidance. What am I missing? What more must I do?" Yue looked at his earnest student with compassion, seeing the weight of spiritual ambition that had become a burden rather than a path to freedom. He understood that Goshu's very effort to achieve enlightenment had become the obstacle to recognizing his inherent awakeness. "There is no secret trick to Zen study," Yue said simply. "It's just a matter of freedom from birth and death." Goshu's brow furrowed with confusion. This answer seemed to make his quest even more daunting. "Master, how does one pass through birth and death to freedom? That sounds like the most difficult task of all. If I cannot even quiet my mind for a few minutes, how can I transcend birth and death?" Yui's eyes brightened, and he raised his voice with sudden intensity. "Your every passing thought is birth and death." At these words, something shifted dramatically in Goshu's understanding. Like a veil suddenly lifted, he saw that what he had been seeking as some future attainment was actually the very nature of his present experience. The constant arising and passing away of thoughts, sensations, and emotions. This endless flow was not something to escape, but the very freedom he had been pursuing. Goshu went into ecstasy, feeling as if he had put down a heavy burden he didn't even realize he had been carrying. The relief was profound and immediate. All his years of struggling to become something special dissolved into the recognition that he had never been anything other than the aware space in which all experience appears and disappears. As the Buddha observed, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. What emerges from this story is the recognition that we suffer not because we lack something, but because we don't recognize the freedom that is our fundamental nature. Why do we carry the heavy burden of spiritual becoming? Zen Buddhism points to our identification with the content of consciousness rather than consciousness itself. We mistake ourselves for the stream of thoughts, emotions, and sensations, instead of recognizing ourselves as the aware space in which this stream flows. Every thought that arises is born. Every thought that fades away dies. Every emotion emerges from nowhere and dissolves back into nowhere. Every sensation appears and disappears. This constant birth and death happening in awareness is not a problem to solve, but the very movement of life itself. The deeper understanding here reveals that what we call birth and death are simply names we give to the natural flowing of experience. When we identify with the flow, we suffer the anxiety of constant change. When we recognize ourselves as the awareness in which the flow appears, we discover unshakable peace. Zen Master Huangpo taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This points to the extraordinary fact that the enlightenment we seek is not hidden in special states, but in the ordinary awareness that knows every state. The same awareness that knows anxiety also knows peace. The same awareness that knows confusion also knows clarity. The Buddha said, "In the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. Our spiritual seeking often creates the very problem it attempts to solve by imagining that some states of consciousness are spiritual while others are mundane. Consider how much energy you invest in trying to have better thoughts, more peaceful emotions, or more pleasant experiences. Each effort to improve the content of consciousness reinforces the belief that you are that content, rather than the awareness that witnesses it all with equal presence. In Japanese Zen, there is a teaching called just sitting, or shikantaza. This practice involves recognizing that the sitting itself is enlightenment, rather than a method to achieve enlightenment. Similarly, your current awareness, exactly as it is the freedom you seek, rather than a stepping stone to freedom. Tonight, as thoughts arise and pass away in your awareness, can you recognize the birth and death that UEA pointed to? Can you see that you are not the thoughts that come and go, but the unchanging awareness in which they appear? As the Buddha taught, all conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. The salvation is not in perfecting the conditioned, but in recognizing the unconditioned awareness that you already are. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about contentment and the nature of desire. This is the stonecutter's journey. High in the mountain villages, there lived a simple stonecutter who had discovered the secret of happiness without knowing it. Each dawn, he would climb winding paths to the quarries, his tools balanced across his shoulders. As he worked among the stones, he would sing old mountain songs that echoed across the valleys. Though he was poor by society's measures, living in a modest hut with few possessions, the stonecutter desired nothing more than what he had. His simple life felt complete. The rhythm of his work, the beauty of the mountains, the satisfaction of honest labor. His heart held not a care in the world. One day, he was called to work on the grand mansion of a wealthy nobleman. As he approached the estate, his eyes widened at the magnificence before him. Marble columns reached toward the sky, gardens sprawled in perfect symmetry. For the first time in his life, the stonecutter felt the sharp pang of desire pierce his contentment. "If only I were rich," he sighed. "Then I would not have to earn my living in sweat and toil as I do now." To his amazement, a voice whispered from the stones, "Your wish has been granted. Henceforth, anything you desire will be given to you." He returned home that evening to find his humble hut replaced by a mansion as magnificent as the nobleman's. Overwhelmed with joy, he abandoned his tools and began enjoying the luxurious life of the wealthy. But one hot afternoon, gazing from his ornate window, he saw the king's royal procession passing by. The monarch sat in cool shade, surrounded by noblemen and servants, appearing serene and powerful above the common heat. "How I wish I were a king myself," he thought. and immediately found himself reclining in silk cushions within the royal carriage. But the carriage proved warmer than expected. Even through thick walls, the sun's heat penetrated relentlessly. "I wish I were the sun," he declared, and found himself sending waves of light and heat across the universe. As the sun, he felt magnificent and all-powerful until thick storm clouds gathered, completely blocking his rays. "I wish to be a cloud." And so he became a massive storm cloud, glorying in his power to block the sun. But as he transformed into falling rain, he encountered an enormous rock that blocked his path completely. "A mere rock more powerful than I? I wish to be a rock." Suddenly, he stood tall upon the mountainside, feeling he had achieved true permanence. But soon, he heard chipping sounds at his base. Looking down, he saw a tiny human figure cutting chunks of stone away. "A puny creature more powerful than me! I want to be a man again!" And so he found himself once more a stone cutter, climbing familiar mountain paths. But now, something had changed. As he shaped stones and felt mountain breezes, his heart swelled with deep contentment. His song returned, richer than before, because he had learned to be content with exactly who he was. The Buddha once said, "Health is the greatest gift, contentment the greatest wealth." This ancient wisdom illuminates the endless cycle of wanting that keeps us from recognizing the abundance already present in our lives. Why do we chase after different conditions, always believing happiness lies in the next transformation? Each desire fulfilled only reveals the next desire, creating an endless cycle of dissatisfaction. The stonecutter's journey reveals the futility of seeking happiness through external circumstances. Consider your own versions of this cycle. "I'll be happy when I get promoted," only to discover new stresses. "I'll be content with more money," only to find greater wealth brings new worries. Each achievement reveals the next mountain to climb. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the heart of contentment, the ability to fully accept what is, while still engaging wholeheartedly with life's natural changes. The stonecutter's final transformation wasn't into something greater, but into appreciation for what he had always been. His work remained the same, but his relationship to life was completely transformed. Contentment isn't found in having different experiences, but in bringing different awareness to whatever experiences arise. Tonight, as you notice the mind's habitual reaching toward what's not here, can you experiment with the stonecutter's final wisdom? Can you find the song that emerges when you stop trying to be anything other than what you are? As the Buddha taught, contentment is natural wealth, luxury is artificial poverty. The greatest transformation available isn't becoming something different, but recognizing the inherent completeness of what we already are. Let us now explore a story about choice, responsibility, and the power we hold in every moment. This is the tale of the young man and the bird. A clever young student had grown tired of his teacher's seemingly wise responses to every question. He was convinced that the old master simply spoke in riddles to appear profound, and he decided to devise a test that would expose what he believed was mere pretense. After thinking for several days, he conceived what he thought was the perfect trap. One morning, the young man caught a small sparrow in the garden. The tiny bird trembled in his cupped hands, its heart beating rapidly against his palms. He held it carefully behind his back as he approached his teacher, who was sitting peacefully in the morning sunlight, reading ancient texts. "Master, the student called out with barely concealed excitement. "I have a question that will test your legendary wisdom." The old teacher looked up from his reading with patient, gentle eyes. He had seen this look of mischievous confidence in many students over the years, and he understood the young man's need to challenge authority as part of his own growth and learning. "Please," the teacher said simply, "ask your question." The student stepped closer, keeping the bird hidden behind his back. "Master, I hold a small bird in my hands. Using your great wisdom, tell me, is this bird alive or dead?" The young man felt incredibly clever. He had created what he believed was an impossible situation for his teacher. If the master answered alive, he would quickly snap the bird's neck and reveal the dead creature, proving the teacher wrong. If the master answered dead, he would simply open his hands and let the living bird fly away, again proving the teacher's lack of true insight. Either way, the student was certain he would expose his teacher's supposed wisdom as nothing more than lucky guessing and philosophical double talk. He waited eagerly for the response that would give him the satisfaction of finally outsmarting the old man. The teacher sat quietly for a long moment, not trying to peer behind the student's back or gather more information. His eyes seemed to look not at the student, but through him, as if perceiving something far deeper than the simple trick being attempted. Finally, with a gentle smile that held both compassion and understanding, the master spoke. "The answer, my young friend, is in your hands." The student stood frozen, his mouth hanging open slightly. In 3 simple words, his elaborate trap had been completely dismantled. The teacher hadn't fallen for either option of the false dilemma. Instead, he had pointed to something far more profound: the fundamental truth that the student himself held the power to determine the outcome. The young man looked down at his hands, still cupped behind his back, feeling the tiny bird's rapid heartbeat against his palms. He realized with startling clarity that the master was right. The bird's fate had never depended on the teacher's answer or supposed wisdom. It had always been entirely in the student's control. More than that, he began to understand that this was true about far more than just this moment. The power to choose life or death, creation or destruction, compassion or cruelty, all of it was always in his hands, in every situation, every day. Slowly, the young man brought his hands forward and opened them. The small bird sat still for just a moment, as if gathering itself, then spread its wings and flew into the blue sky, disappearing among the trees. Buddha's wisdom teaches us, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound responsibility that comes with conscious choice and the recognition that we are always the architects of our own experience. Why do we so often look outside ourselves for answers that can only be found within? Zen Buddhism points to our tendency to seek authority figures who will tell us what to do, what to think, what to choose. But the deepest teaching is that true wisdom cannot be given from one person to another. It can only be discovered through our own conscious engagement with life. The student's question seemed to be about the teacher's insight, but it was actually about his own power. He was so focused on proving the master wrong that he almost missed the profound truth being offered, that every moment presents us with choices that shape not only our immediate circumstances, but our character and destiny. Consider your own daily decisions, both large and small. How often do you wait for someone else to tell you what the right choice is? How frequently do you seek permission, approval, or guidance for decisions that ultimately rest entirely in your own hands. The young man's bird represents all the power we hold, but sometimes fail to recognize. In our relationships, careers, and spiritual development, we constantly face moments where we hold something precious in our hands: the well-being of others, our own integrity, opportunities for growth or destruction. The outcome depends not on external circumstances or other people's wisdom, but on what we choose to do with the power we possess. The Master's response reveals something crucial about authentic teaching. True teachers don't give answers. They point us back to our own capacity for wisdom. They help us recognize the choices we're already making and the power we already possess, rather than encouraging dependence on their authority. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck said, "We are always in choice, even when we think we're not." The bird in the student's hands represents all the moments when we convince ourselves we have no options, no power, no responsibility. But consciousness always involves choice, and choice always involves responsibility. Look deeply at a current challenge in your life. Where are you waiting for someone else to provide answers, solutions, or direction? What would change if you fully recognize that the power to shape the outcome is already in your hands? This doesn't mean you have control over all external circumstances, but you always have choice about how you respond. The Buddha taught, "The mind is everything. What you think, you become." Every thought, every intention, every action is like the student's choice with the bird, an opportunity to create life or death, beauty or suffering, wisdom or ignorance. The answer is always in our hands. Tonight, as you consider the various situations in your life where you seek guidance or feel powerless, can you sense the truth the Master was pointing to? Can you feel the weight of the choices you carry every day, not as a burden, but as the fundamental dignity of conscious existence? As the Buddha observed, "No one saves us but ourselves. No one can and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path." The bird flies free, not because of the teacher's wisdom, but because of the student's choice. In recognizing our own power to choose life over death, compassion over cruelty, truth over deception, we discover that the answer to every important question has always been in our hands. Our next story reveals the profound difference between spiritual performance and authentic understanding. This is the teaching of the head that wished to be severed. In the great monastery of Chao Chu, where hundreds of monks gathered daily for meditation and study, the morning routines followed ancient rhythms. After the pre-dawn sitting, as the first light touched the mountain peaks surrounding the monastery, monks would disperse to their various duties, some to the gardens, others to the kitchens, still others to copying sacred texts or maintaining the buildings. One particular morning, the Venerable Abbot Chao Cho made his customary walk through the monastery grounds, checking on the well-being of his students and the condition of their practice. His presence was both gentle and penetrating. Monks never knew when their most casual words might become profound teachings, or when their deepest spiritual insights might be revealed as mere intellectual concepts. As he passed behind the main meditation hall, a building where the community gathered twice daily for silent sitting, the abbot noticed a young monk sitting alone in the shadow of the wooden structure. The monk appeared to be engaged in some form of practice, though he was apart from the scheduled community activities. "Brother," Chao Cho called softly, approaching with the quiet steps that had become second nature through decades of mindful walking. "Where have all the virtuous ones gone?" The question seemed simple enough, almost like casual conversation, but those familiar with Cao Chou's teaching style recognized the subtle depth in his inquiry. Was he asking about physical location, spiritual attainment, or something else entirely? The young monk looked up with an expression of confident understanding. He had been at the monastery for several years and prided himself on grasping the essential points of Zen teaching. This seemed like an opportunity to demonstrate his comprehension of the Dharma. "They have all gone to work," the monk replied matter-of-factly, gesturing toward the various parts of the monastery where his brothers were engaged in their daily tasks. His tone suggested that the answer was obvious. Virtuous people naturally engage in productive activity rather than sitting idle. What happened next shocked the young monk completely. Without warning, Cao Chou reached into the folds of his robe and produced a sharp knife, its blade gleaming in the morning sunlight. But instead of threatening the monk, the abbot did something far more unsettling. With complete calmness, Cao Chou stretched out his own neck, exposing his throat to the blade, and handed the knife to the bewildered young monk. His voice remained gentle and conversational, as if he were making the most reasonable request in the world. "My responsibilities as abbot are many and demanding," he said with apparent sincerity. "I wonder if you could please cut off my head for me. It would be such a help in managing my duties." The young monk's eyes widened in horror. His hands trembled as he stared at the knife now in his possession and the exposed neck of his revered teacher. Everything about the situation contradicted his understanding of proper monastic behavior, spiritual teaching, and basic human decency. Unable to comprehend what was being asked of him or why, unable to see past the literal surface of the abbot's request to any deeper meaning, the terrified monk dropped the knife and ran. His feet carried him far from the meditation hall, far from the incomprehensible scene, his mind reeling with confusion and fear. Cao Chou calmly picked up the fallen knife, tucked it back into his robe, and continued his morning walk with the same peaceful demeanor he had maintained throughout the entire encounter. As the Buddha observed, it is better to travel well than to arrive. What emerges from this story is a teaching about the vast difference between intellectual understanding and genuine realization. Why do we so often mistake conceptual knowledge for authentic wisdom? Zen Buddhism reveals that our thinking mind loves to collect spiritual ideas and organize them into neat categories, creating the illusion of understanding without the transformative experience of direct insight. The young monk's response, "They have all gone to work," represents the kind of dualistic thinking that separates spiritual practice from ordinary activity. His answer implied that virtue lies in doing productive tasks rather than sitting idly, revealing his assumption that awakened activity and rest exist in opposition to each other. But Cao Chou's teaching cuts much deeper than this surface interpretation. By offering his neck to the knife, he was asking a profound question. If the monk truly understood that all the virtuous ones had gone to work, what work was most essential? If responsibility truly mattered, what was the most compassionate response to suffering? Look deeply at your own spiritual assumptions. How often do we divide life into spiritual activities and mundane ones, important work and trivial tasks, sacred moments and ordinary time? This dualistic thinking keeps us from recognizing that every moment offers opportunities for awakened response. The abbot's gesture points toward the heart of Zen understanding. Genuine compassion sometimes requires actions that transcend conventional thinking. When someone is truly suffering under the burden of responsibility, attachment, or spiritual seeking itself, what is the most loving response? Sometimes it requires cutting through the very thing that seems most precious: our concepts, our roles, even our sense of separate self. Zen master Linji taught, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill the Buddha." This famous saying points to the same radical teaching Cao Cho offered. Any fixed idea about enlightenment, any attachment to spiritual roles or concepts, becomes an obstacle to direct realization. True compassion sometimes requires destroying the very thing we think we're trying to protect. The young monk's terror and flight revealed how completely he missed this deeper level of teaching. He remained trapped in literal interpretation, unable to see past the surface of the abbot's words to their transformative invitation. His spiritual understanding, though articulate, remained purely conceptual. Consider your own relationship to spiritual responsibility and helping others. When someone asks for help with their suffering, do we offer concepts and advice, or do we respond from a deeper place of understanding? Are we willing to sacrifice our comfortable spiritual positions to meet others exactly where they are? This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between talking about virtue and embodying it. The monk could identify where virtuous people go and what they do, but when faced with an opportunity for radical compassion, he fled. His knowledge remained divorced from spontaneous, awakened action. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called great doubt, a willingness to question even our most cherished spiritual understandings. This doubt isn't cynicism, but openness to discoveries that transcend our current conceptual frameworks. Are we prepared to have our spiritual certainties challenged, even destroyed, if it serves awakening? Tonight, as you encounter opportunities to help others with their burdens, can you sense the difference between offering what you think they need and responding from genuine understanding? Can you feel how true compassion sometimes requires cutting through your own comfortable assumptions about what constitutes appropriate spiritual behavior? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "In caring for others, you care for yourself. In caring for yourself, you care for others." The abbot's offer to sacrifice his own head points toward this non-dual understanding. When we truly see interconnection, the boundaries between self and other, helper and helped, begin to dissolve into spontaneous, compassionate action. Let us continue on our journey with a story about how our inner landscape shapes our outer experience. This is the tale of the two towns. In a bustling marketplace where merchants hawked their wares and travelers stopped to rest on their journeys, a wise Zen master had established a modest tea stall. People came not only for refreshment, but for the master's reputation for offering practical wisdom to those facing life's transitions and uncertainties. On this particular day, two different men approached the master's stall, each carrying the same question but embodying very different energies. Both were considering major life changes. Both were strangers to this place, and both sought guidance about whether this town might become their new home. The first man arrived with a tense expression, his shoulders carrying the weight of accumulated frustrations. As he approached the tea stall, his eyes darted around suspiciously, already assessing and finding fault with what he observed. "I'm thinking of moving to this town," he announced without preamble. "What's it like?" The Zen master looked at the man with gentle attention, noting not just his words, but the quality of energy he brought to the question. Rather than offering immediate description, the master asked his own question. "What was your old town like?" The first man's response came quickly, as if he had rehearsed these complaints many times. "It was dreadful," he said with obvious bitterness. "Everyone was hateful and unfriendly. The neighbors were inconsiderate, the shopkeepers were rude, and the whole place was full of selfish, unpleasant people. I couldn't stand it there anymore." The master nodded thoughtfully, his expression remaining compassionate despite the negativity pouring from his visitor. "This town is very much the same," he replied simply. "I don't think you should move here." The first man's face darkened with disappointment and frustration. Without another word, he turned and walked away, muttering under his breath about how this place was probably just as bad as everywhere else. Shortly after the first man departed, the second traveler approached the tea stall. His manner was notably different, relaxed, curious, and open. His eyes took in the surroundings with appreciation rather than judgment, and when he smiled at the master, it seemed to come from a place of genuine warmth. "I'm thinking of moving to this town," he said cheerfully. "What's it like?" The master regarded this second visitor with the same careful attention he had given the first, again choosing to learn more before offering his assessment. "What was your old town like?" he asked. The second man's face lit up as he considered the question. "It was wonderful," he said with obvious fondness. "Everyone was so friendly and helpful. My neighbors looked out for each other. The local merchants knew everyone by name, and there was a real sense of community. I was very happy there. I'm only considering a change because I'm looking for new adventures and opportunities." The master smiled knowingly. "This town is very much the same," he told the second man. "I think you will like it here very much." The second man's face broke into a delighted grin. He thanked the master warmly and walked away with a spring in his step, already seeing possibilities and connections in his new environment. Buddha's wisdom teaches us, all that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. What we think, we become. This ancient insight illuminates the profound truth demonstrated by the master's seemingly contradictory responses to the two travelers. Here, we discover one of the most fundamental principles of human experience. We don't see the world as it is, but as we are. The master gave identical answers to both men because he recognized that their questions revealed far more about their internal states than about their external circumstances. Why do some people find community and kindness wherever they go, while others encounter hostility and disappointment in the same environments? Buddhist psychology explains that our perceptual filters, shaped by our habitual mental patterns, literally create our experienced reality. We notice evidence that confirms our existing beliefs while filtering out information that contradicts them. The first man carried what modern psychology might call a negative attribution bias, the tendency to interpret ambiguous situations in the most negative possible way. His mind was like a magnet for negative experiences, not because the world was inherently hostile, but because that's what he was conditioned to see. The second man demonstrated the opposite pattern, a generous attribution style that assumed the best in others and looked for positive connections. His mind was attuned to kindness and possibility. Consider how this plays out in daily life. Two people can work in the same office and have completely different experiences. One sees politics, competition, and dysfunction everywhere. The other finds mentorship, collaboration, and growth opportunities in the same environment. This doesn't mean that objective conditions don't matter, or that all experiences are equally positive. Rather, it points to the enormous influence our mental habits have on shaping our lived reality. As Zen teacher Jon Kabat-Zinn says, "Wherever you go, there you are." We carry our internal weather with us, and it colors everything we encounter. The master's wisdom lay in recognizing that no external change of location could solve the first man's problem. If he moved to this town with the same negative perceptual filters, he would recreate the same disappointing experiences he was trying to escape. This insight has profound implications for how we approach life changes and problem solving. Often, when we're unhappy with our circumstances, our first instinct is to change the external conditions. But if we don't address the internal patterns that created our dissatisfaction, we simply recreate similar problems in new settings. But this principle works in both directions. When we cultivate mental habits of appreciation, curiosity, and goodwill, we begin to notice more evidence supporting those perspectives. The world doesn't magically change, but our capacity to see its positive qualities expands dramatically. Tonight, as you reflect on your own experiences of community, work, and relationships, can you notice the interpretive lens through which you typically view these interactions? Are you more like the first traveler, scanning for problems and disappointments, or the second, looking for connection and possibility? As the Buddha taught, the mind is everything, what you think you become. The most powerful tool for transforming our external experience lies not in changing our circumstances, but in changing the quality of awareness we bring to whatever circumstances we encounter. Our next story reveals a profound teaching about the nature of emptiness and the surprising places where we discover truth. This is the story of grasping what cannot be held. In a quiet monastery garden where cherry blossoms drifted gently on the morning breeze, Master Sekyo sat with one of his most earnest students. The young monk had been studying Buddhist philosophy for several years, filling his mind with concepts about the nature of reality, the illusion of the self, and the teaching of emptiness that seems so central to the Buddha's wisdom. He could recite passages about shunyata, discuss the philosophical implications of non-being, and engage in lengthy debates about the relationship between form and void. But for all his intellectual understanding, something felt missing. The words remained just words, concepts floating in his mind without the direct experience that would make them real. He approached his teacher that morning with a question that had been troubling him for months. "Master," the young monk said, bowing respectfully, "I have studied the teaching of emptiness extensively. I understand that all phenomena arise and pass away, that nothing has permanent, independent existence. But I feel like I'm only grasping concepts. Can you help me get hold of emptiness itself?" Sekyo looked at his student with knowing eyes. He had seen this struggle many times before, the gap between intellectual understanding and direct realization, the frustration of trying to grasp with the mind what can only be known through experience. "Show me how you would get hold of emptiness," the master said simply. The monk thought for a moment, then cupped his hands in the air as if he were trying to capture something invisible. He held his hands carefully as though cradling a soap bubble that might burst at any moment. His face was earnest and concentrated, his entire being focused on this attempt to demonstrate his understanding of a teaching about the very nature of nothingness. "There," he said, holding his cupped hands very still. "I'm trying to hold emptiness itself." Sekyo looked at the student's empty hands and shook his head gently. "That's not very good," he said with a slight smile. "You haven't got anything in there at all. You're just holding air and calling it something special." The monk's face fell. He had been so certain that his gesture captured something meaningful about the teaching. "Well, master," he said, his voice tinged with disappointment and confusion, "please show me a better way. How does one truly get hold of emptiness?" Without warning, Master Sekyo reached out and grabbed the monk's nose, giving it a sharp, firm yank. "Ouch!" the monk yelled, his hands flying to his face, his eyes watering from the sudden, unexpected pain. "Master, that hurt me!" Sekyo released his grip, and smiled broadly. "Now that," he said with satisfaction, "is how you get hold of emptiness." The monk stood there, rubbing his nose, completely bewildered. His nose throbbed with very real, very unempty pain. How could this physical sensation, this undeniable presence of discomfort, have anything to do with emptiness? It seemed like the opposite of everything he had been studying. But as the initial shock wore off, something began to shift in his understanding. The pain in his nose was absolutely real, yet it was also completely impermanent, already beginning to fade. It had arisen from nowhere, would disappear completely, and left no permanent mark on reality. It was both utterly present and completely insubstantial. More importantly, in the moment of that sharp sensation, all his conceptual thinking about emptiness had vanished entirely. There had been no philosophical analysis, no abstract understanding, just direct, immediate experience. The gap between the one experiencing and the thing experienced had dissolved in the simple reality of ouch. As the Buddha taught, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Here we discover that emptiness is not the absence of experience, but the very nature of all experience. Everything arises, exists for a moment, and passes away, leaving no permanent trace while being completely real in its moment of appearing. Why do we struggle so hard to understand emptiness conceptually when it's the very fabric of every moment? Zen Buddhism points to our habit of trying to grasp reality with our thinking minds rather than experiencing it directly. We turn the most immediate truths into abstract philosophies, then wonder why they feel distant and theoretical. The monk's mistake was common and understandable. He was trying to hold emptiness as if it were a thing, an object that could be captured and possessed. But emptiness isn't an object. It's the very condition that allows all objects to appear and disappear. It's not something we can grasp. It's what makes grasping possible. Consider your own experience right now. The thoughts arising in your mind. Where do they come from? Where do they go when they fade? The sensations in your body, the sounds around you, even your sense of being someone who is reading these words. All of it is appearing and disappearing in the space of awareness, like clouds in an empty sky. This emptiness isn't blank nothingness. It's alive, responsive, creative, the very capacity for experience itself. When Sekio yanked his student's nose, he wasn't demonstrating the absence of sensation, but the miraculous way sensation appears from nowhere, exists vividly, and dissolves back into nowhere, all within the spacious emptiness of awareness. Zen Master Huang Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." The monk was rejecting his direct experience in favor of his concepts about experience. The master's intervention brought him back to the immediacy of seeing, feeling, and knowing without the filter of philosophical analysis. In our daily lives, we constantly encounter this same teaching. The anger that seems so solid and permanent when we're caught in it. Where does it go when it naturally subsides? The worry that feels so important and real. What is its actual substance when we look closely? Even our sense of being a solid, separate self, isn't it actually more like a flowing process? A river that appears to be the same while constantly changing. The Buddha said, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence." This isn't a philosophical statement, but a direct pointing to what's happening right now. Everything we experience is empty, in the sense that it has no permanent, independent existence. yet it's all perfectly real as it appears. Tonight, as you notice thoughts, sensations, and experiences arising and passing in your awareness, can you sense the emptiness that Sekyo was pointing to? Not as an abstract concept, but as the very space in which your life is unfolding. Can you feel how this emptiness is not separate from the fullness of your experience, but is its very nature? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, in the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. The emptiness of all phenomena isn't something we need to achieve or understand. It's what we are, what everything is right now. We just need to stop trying to grasp it and let ourselves be grasped by it instead. As we draw tonight's journey to a close, take a moment to notice how the calm you've discovered isn't something you need to chase or earn. It's already here, woven into the fabric of your being, waiting patiently for your attention. Can you feel how the deep quiet you've touched tonight exists not only in these ancient tales, but in the space between your thoughts, in the rhythm of your breathing, in this very moment of awareness? The Buddha reminded us, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. This timeless wisdom points to something remarkable, that tranquility and understanding don't require perfect conditions or extraordinary circumstances. They arise naturally from your own capacity to be present, to observe without judgment, to simply rest in what is. Each story we've explored tonight has whispered the same gentle truth, that freedom comes not from getting what we want, but from releasing our desperate need to control outcomes. That clarity emerges when we stop fighting our experience and start embracing it with compassion. That happiness blooms when we recognize the difference between what we can change and what we must accept. Even when your thoughts wander tomorrow, even when stress returns or uncertainty clouds your mind, the insights you've gathered tonight have taken root. They're not going anywhere. Like seeds planted in fertile ground, they'll continue growing, offering support and guidance when you need it most. As you prepare to transition into rest, recognize that these timeless teachings haven't shown you a complicated philosophy or distant ideal. They've simply reminded you how to return home to yourself, how to find refuge in the present moment, how to breathe consciously, how to let your heart settle into its natural state of openness. This wisdom isn't reserved for monasteries or meditation retreats. It lives in the simple act of pausing before reacting, in choosing kindness over criticism, in remembering that this moment, exactly as it is, contains everything you need. Tonight, you've tasted that truth directly, not through concepts or beliefs, but through your own lived experience. As you carry this peace with you beyond tonight, remember that it's not fragile or temporary. It's as reliable as your breath, as accessible as your next conscious moment. Whether you're navigating joy or difficulty, success or setback, this inner refuge remains constant, a steady presence beneath the changing weather of daily life. The stories end here, but their essence continues in how you choose to meet each new day. May you remember that the tranquility you've found tonight is your birthright, not a luxury. May you trust that the clarity you've touched is always available, just one mindful breath away. Thank you for allowing us to share this space with you at Sleepy Monk. Rest deeply, knowing that the peace you've discovered tonight is yours to keep, yours to return to, yours to trust. Sleep well,